welcome to this episode of The Martial Truth. My interview with Sensei Andy Sloane. Okay, Andy Sloane's a senior practitioner of Isshin-Ryu, been training Isshin-Ryu for quite a long time. Lived on Okinawa for a long time. Member of the U.S. Armed Services, the Navy, and currently residing in Japan. No longer on Okinawa, but he's in Japan, I believe Iwakuni. And we'll be talking about Isshin-Ryu history and pretty much all things Isshin-Ryu and Okinawa and whatever else we decide to talk about. All right. Appreciate all of you. Again, channel continues to grow. Lot of new subscribers. Great. Bunch of new members. Thanks to all the members, you guys that pay the monthly fee. It's great. It helps me out a lot. We have more things planned. So this one is an interview with Andy Sloane. We'll have more interviews coming up as time goes on. And again, if you like the video, please click that like. Please subscribe. Consider becoming a member. Okay. It really helps me. It helps the channel to grow. It helps with that YouTube algorithm. And I appreciate all of you. All right. So without further ado, here's my interview with Andy Sloane. Andy Sloane, welcome to the Martial Truth Podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So for those of you who don't know, Andy Sloane is a 7th Dan, correct?
Yes, sir.
Right. Studied under Sensei Ed Johnson, an original student of Tatsuo Shimabuku Sensei. Is in the military, the U.S. Navy, correct?
That's right. 18 years next month.
And he's lived on Okinawa for a long time. Currently is living in Japan, but he's living in the mainland, not on Okinawa anymore. And we're going to talk about everything Isshin-Ryu today. Isshin-Ryu history, dispel some myths maybe, and see what happens and have some fun.
All right, hopefully not ruffle too many feathers.
Yeah, no, that's all right. We're allowed to ruffle feathers. That's why it's called the martial truth, right? So, let's start with Tatsuo training with Kian.
Okay, so I believe that he started with Kian, in about 1927 because Mr. Avincula, as most know, did a tremendous amount of research in years and decades previous, and he said that he interviewed Tatsuo Shimabuku on numerous occasions, of course, but in I think 1984, he asked for a chronology on Tatsuo's training, and Tatsuo said, "Let me ask my mother, and I'll get back with you," kind of a thing like that. And so he visited him again later that same trip, I think, and got this chronology. And Mrs. Shimabuku said that Tatsuo started with Kian the year that they had gotten married, but said that the year they got married was 1932. But I actually have a copy of Master Uesu's Koseki, or family register, and it has a page from Master Shimabuku's family history, and it talks about his data, like when he was born and when he died and when he got married and all that. And it says he got married in 1927. So it's interesting that Mrs. Shimabuku wouldn't have remembered the year they actually got married, but the Okinawans don't seem to remember things like we might want to remember.
Right, right. And also their years, like even with their birthday,
they do things a little differently, and depending on who they tell and whatever, they may be not rounding up per se, but counting an extra year. Because a lot of the Eastern cultures, they like when you're born, you're automatically a year old, and then at the beginning of the year, you're a year old. And the Koreans, actually, when I was in Korea, learned that they do it a different way, and they add like another year on that, even.
Okay.
Depending on the reckoning. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, it's interesting. I just interviewed Andreas Quast, and he mentioned something that I'd never even thought of or heard of before. So I'll run this by you in terms of Tatsuo's chronology. He mentioned that I think it was either 29 or 31 that Miyagi was teaching at a particular location, and he said he thought Kian was teaching at the same place. It was a school or something, and he said he believes Tatsuo was training there at the same time also, and he mentioned that might have been where Tatsuo learned Seiyuchin kata. He also mentioned that the version that we do in Isshin-Ryu, that might have been the version that Miyagi was teaching at the time when he was teaching there, that the kata could have changed and may have changed over time, and that there were, a different version being taught because maybe that's when he was first teaching it and he decided to change and add some
Mhm.
things. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I'd never heard that, that come up before, you know.
Well, it's certainly possible. I mean, I don't, as much as I am confident about many things that I do know, I will certainly say I don't know everything.
All
So
right.
there
I
are
think it's I
things
think
I
it's
could be
hard to
wrong
know
about.
everything, right?
Right. I mean, I certainly don't. I mean, I'm just confident about some of the things I say, and I know that makes some people kind of
Right.
upset with me, but
And so so like when I asked Tokumura Kensho one time, how often Tatsuo trained with Kion as opposed to Miyagi, and his answer was very interesting. He said, "Well, Kion lived really close, so Tatsuo could, this is what he said, right?" And then he also said, "But Miyagi Sensei was pretty far. So in terms of where his geographical location,
it depends on what point in their lives that you're talking about, though.
All right,
Because
right,
if he's talking about, so the time frame that I believe that Tatsuo trained with Miyagi was in the late 1940s, and
okay,
that's when Miyagi was living in the internment camp in Koza, which is actually relatively close to where Tatsuo lived in Town Village. And Miyagi would go over to that side of the island to Taba Village to visit his daughter who had a house there, and he would also teach at the Gushikawa City Police Station, and who knows where all Miyagi went and taught and visited
right,
and so.
right,
But according to Robert Slywood told me this also, but he said that, and I think Greg Goodson even said it before too, but Mrs. Shimabuku said that Tatsuo was taught privately in their home by Miyagi, that Miyagi would come by their house.
okay,
And so she went upstairs to Master Uezu's dojo back in the day when it used to be the dojo on the second floor of his house there. And Miyagi's photo was on the wall, and she said, "Oh, that's Bushi Miyagusuku. It's his Okinawan name." And she said that he used to come by the house to teach Tatsuo privately.
okay,
So, that's the story I got. But I know some people think that Tatsuo started with Miyagi in the late 1930s. But to me, it's like, well, why in the world would he have waited a decade if he trained with Miyagi in the late 30s to start putting the two systems together? To me, that makes no sense. Seemed
right.
like he was doing that right away. So I think it was in the late 1940s
Well,
that he
the only thing I know is that I know that Tatsuo was not on Okinawa from 41 to 45.
well, from 41 to 43, or excuse me, 39 to 41, basically. And then he came back and he got his wife pregnant, and then Shinsho was born in March of 42.
Well,
So
Kichiro said the whole war. I asked Kichiro in 2019, and he said the whole war they were in Kyushu.
So I thought that they did not go there until 1944 because when the main Okinawa island was bombed in October of 44, that's pretty much when the Japanese government started trying to evacuate a lot of the civilians. And they didn't get a lot of them off like they thought they could, but Tatsuo's family was able to go. And I didn't think they left until 1944 and didn't come back until
Yeah,
46.
I asked him. He said they were off the island for the whole war.
Okay, well, I mean,
And and this is what he said. He said his father made the decision to get them off the island, and he also added that many people that made the trip from Okinawa to Kyushu didn't make it. Many
yeah, some of the
Okinawans,
ships, some of the
many
transport ships got sunk and everything. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
And
sad.
I'm hoping I'm going to Okinawa, I think in November, and I'm hoping to sit down with Kichiro Shimabuku and do a more in-depth interview with him and get some things. And I'm also, so I'm hoping to do that and see what he has to say about certain things. And
Well, yeah,
maybe again with, putting everything, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. I mean,
yeah,
this.
exactly. Oh, yeah.
And so maybe between, what you heard and what I find out, and who knows, maybe it'll confirm some things. Maybe he'll say some things that none of us even considered. I mean, I just don't know, right?
Well, yeah, it'd
But
be great.
but I'm
So
hoping.
I always thought that Shinsho was born on Okinawa, though. So to me, I think that that is the case because he studied, as far as I can tell, with Moto Buchoki in about 1942, but just
Okay.
for a few months, and then he left to go to Osaka. That's what I was of the understanding, was that once he left the Philippines and came back in 41. So his dad, Tatsuo's father, passed away in 1941, according to Adventula. So I believe that he came back from the Philippines because his dad was either sick or had died, and he was coming back home since he was the oldest son to take care of what he needed to take care of. And then by that time, Motobu had moved back from Osaka to Okinawa and had his dojo going. So Tatsuo was able to train with him briefly, but not for just a few months. And then he was off again. And I think that Advincula said that Shinsho told him that Tatsuo had moved to Osaka. And I think that perhaps he got the notion to go to Osaka from Motobu because that's where Motobu had spent like 20 years living, you
Right.
know. And I know a lot of Okinawans did go there, but that seems like it's a plausible scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing is, I mean, I understand he's interviewing Shinsho and stuff, but the thing to keep in mind with Shinsho is, he had some problems.
He did have a head injury later in life there. I was told he had some. He used to live right down the street, literally from the middle school where he worked as a shop teacher. And the story I was told was that some kids had pushed him down the stairs and he had a head injury and he was taking a sabbatical from work. And I don't know how long it was, but he had ended up passing away, in his home there by himself, and nobody knew about it for some time.
Well, I know someone that saw him probably about a year before he passed away. Someone that was in the military, had trained in Okinawa, and wasn't a first generation student, but he knew Shinsho, trained a lot with Angi when he was there, trained with Kichiro when he was there, and he went to the house just to visit and say hello. And he said when Shinsho came to the door, his fingernails were this long
Oh wow!
and his hair was all down. And he
Oh, is
said,
that right?
yeah, and he said it was a blank stare. He said Shinsho, he could tell. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a head injury. I don't know if maybe he was bipolar. I don't know, but I know, both. I know initially both Kichiro and Angi were trying to deal with it, but and some people have made some pretty negative comments in that regard. But unless you've had a family member who is
Going through
has
that.
has mental health issues, and especially if they refuse to stay on their medication, it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
I
So
wish I had been able to meet him, when he was a better, space,
right.
but I didn't get to
Well,
Okinawa in time.
well, all the first generation students I met and trained with, and I've met and trained with a lot of them. Every one of them says that his karate was the best, probably out of
Yeah, yeah, they
all the
said it was just
Okinawans.
like his dad's, basically.
Yeah. And it's sad, it's sad what happened at the end. But again, I mean, I personally try to take the position. I try not to judge other people's family situations. I also kind of feel it's none of my business. Meaning, I'll tell people that story because it's a true story. The guy who told me, it wasn't just one guy, there was two guys there. And they were shocked. They were shocked. And then they were probably two of the last people to see him alive because when he was discovered in the house, he had been dead for quite a long time.
Yeah, and I think that was another reason why some people didn't really want to talk about it because it was like, bad omen because he
Right,
really was by himself and
right,
nobody knew it for like 3 years or something, and
right.
it's like
Yeah,
that's a whole
I don't know if it was that long, but it was it was a while. And again, I don't judge people at all. Again, it's none of my business. I don't know what's going on there. You know, it's like if I've said this on one of the other podcasts, sometimes being a sensei, they expect certain things. A student will ask me, "Oh, I'm having trouble with my marriage," and I go like this, "Eh, that's not my department." So if you're looking for advice there, I don't give advice on marriage, right? Because again, it's family stuff, and it's not gonna. I don't know the full story, and it's the same thing with those kinds of situations, right? And I find it interesting that there's a certain crew of individuals that claim that Tatsuo didn't train with Kian.
I don't know where that is coming from, to be honest. I mean, I know that back in 2012, there was a snafu with an article in the magazine that was not supposed to turn out the way that it did whatsoever. And when I was involved in assisting the editor of that magazine, he, he seemed to be very pleased with the things that I had sent to him because he believed that it was well thought about and well researched and so on, but he wanted me to write the article. And at that time, I didn't have time to do it because I was
Right.
getting ready to leave Okinawa to go to Korea. And so when he wrote the article and sent me the first draft of it, I was astounded that he wrote what he wrote because I didn't say or imply any of what he said about Shimabuku not having any famous instructors.
So
And
that would be David Chambers.
that's right. That was David Chambers of Classical Fighting Arts
Yeah.
magazine. And, I know people were mad at me over the thing. I was like, but look, I can prove that I went to great detail to explain what I thought was right at the time, what he learned from the teachers and when he trained with them and all that stuff. So where he
So
got,
let me give you a couple of things with David Chambers. So you never met him, right?
I did, I
Oh, you
did.
met
And
him?
yeah, I met him in the spring of 2012 when he came to Okinawa. And a few months prior to that, like around the turn of that year, 2011 into 2012, I had sent him all this research stuff that I had because so he was taking over a project from Harry Cook. You probably know that name,
Yeah, I know
but
that name.
he was distancing himself from Mr. Cook because of the legal problems that he had. But he wanted to take over that project, that Karate Chronicles book, and he told me that he was toying with the idea of leaving Isshin-Ryu out of it, but he didn't really want to do that. And so he had written about a 6-page article prior to our conversation, and he said, "Hey, will you take a look at this?" Because I guess he felt like I wasn't a kook or something, and so he trusted my thoughts on it, and so he sent the thing to me, and I expanded on it like 25 additional pages, and I gave him all my sources and all the stuff, and I went like paragraph by paragraph and I hit every single detail that he was talking about. And I said, no, this is not right because of X, Y, and Z, and the whole thing. And so when I finally met him that spring in 2012, he said he must have read that thing like a half a dozen times to try to get it straight who was who and what was what and all that. So I was really astounded that he wrote what he ended up writing. And the only thing he changed between the first draft of the article and the second draft, which is what really got published, was he put the pictures in that I wanted him to, and he captioned the pictures the way I wanted him to caption them, but he didn't really change any of the content. So I was just floored that he said, unless a treasure trove of information becomes available, it's safe to say that Tatsuo didn't have any famous teachers. I'm like, what do you mean? I sent you a picture with him sitting right next to Taita Shinken.
Right. So,
So,
so Sherman Harold told me one time that when Sherman Harold and I forget who the other two gentlemen were who made Bosai Kumite, when they
oh, Gary Baker and John DeSantis.
yeah, so when they were working on that, Sherman Harold said that there was this other Japanese teacher in the dojo, and Okinawan teacher, and Tatsuo was working with him. And Sherman Harold goes, I'm a 17-year-old kid. I don't know who this guy is. I'm not thinking anything of it. And as the guy, we're trying to figure out this thing for this demonstration, this Bosai, and we're working on it. And when the guy's leaving, the other teacher, he walks by them and goes, like good. He goes, good. He tells Sherman Harold and them, and they're like, okay, great. But they didn't know who he was. And Sherman Harold goes, years later, I see a picture and I realize, oh my God, that was Tyrus and Ken. Right.
Yeah,
So Sherman Harold was laughing when he told me the story. He said, so Mike, so the both side Kumite thing, maybe it's not that good, but Tyrus Sensei went, okay, good. That was good, guys. Right. So I got an attaboy from Tyrus and
that's
Ken.
awesome.
Yeah, I met David Chambers in Georgia several years ago, and he was selling his Tsunami DVDs at a table, and I went over and was looking at some of them, and I introduced myself, and I looked at him and I saw the kind of guy I thought he was just from looking at him and talking to him briefly, and I said to him, I said, so what are you training? I said, what martial arts do you train in? And his response was, well, I don't really train in martial arts.
Yeah, that's right.
And
He
my
told me.
response, and my response to him was, that's what I thought. That's literally what I said to him. I said, that's what I thought.
Well, and he told me, when I was first communicating with him, that he was not training anymore and hadn't for a number of years by that point. He said back in the 70s he used to train and was supposed to be like a Nidan and short view or something. But he felt like that actually lent credibility to his magazine so that people couldn't claim that he was biased to one style or the other because he wasn't favoring one
Yeah,
system over
but
the
it's
other.
but it's clear that he is biased because there's certain people and
Yes.
there's certain people he focuses on in his magazine. So in Shorin-Ryu, it's Zempo Shimabukuro, and in Goju-Ryu, it's Mario Higiona. And I mean, they're very good martial artists. There's nothing wrong with those guys. But to say they're the end all and be all of Shorin-Ryu and the end all and be all of Goju-Ryu, I don't think so. Um, and I think, and I'll tell you this. One of the things I've believed for a long time is I think there's a big bias against Isshin-Ryu on Okinawa. And I think that bias goes back to the fact that Tatsuo had the contract with the U.S. government to teach karate.
Well, that's certainly possible. I mean, I personally didn't necessarily feel that there was. I mean, they had like a wait because I used to help a Uechi sensei for about 10 years at the time that I was there. The last, couple 3 years, I really was focusing on my own class instead of his helping him. But I still would help him whenever my schedule was such that I could. But after the COVID hit and he changed the schedule, I worked on the other side of the island, so it's hard for me to get over to Camp Foster to help him out. So mainly I was doing the other, but whenever he would do demonstrations and stuff, he would have me participate. So that was nice that the government wanted Isshin-Ryu representatives to be there. So, we were there. And in 2015, we also did a demonstration for the Ringo Kai's 25th
Oh,
anniversary.
oh,
That was nice. I never felt like, outwardly at least, that there was any real hatred or tension there towards us. I think that they really liked the fact that we still had the system there, even if it wasn't very large, and they didn't necessarily want it to go extinct. They're trying to preserve it, but it's just a shame that we didn't have more representation overall there.
right. Well, I asked Zempo Shimabuku several years ago. I was at an event with him, and I asked him. I showed him a particular fist configuration that Sherman Harrell had showed me. That he said one day he was just training at the dojo, and Tatsuo was showing him something, and then all of a sudden, Tatsuo Sensei decided to show him this fist configuration. And when Sherman Harrell told me the story, it was kind of just off the cuff. And he said to me, he said, Mike, I don't know why he showed that to me. He says, like, he never brought it up again. He just showed me this particular fist configuration. And so I was talking to McCarthy. McCarthy was sitting in my living room, and we were talking about the different hand configurations in the Bubishi and the different types of fists you can make. And McCarthy says to me, hey, let me show you this fist that Joe and Nakazato showed me.
The
Right.
same one.
And it's the same one. Right. So now I go to him, I go, holy shit. I go, listen, Sherman Harrell showed me the same fist. And McCarthy's eyes lit up. And he goes, no. I go, yeah, he showed me the fist. And he said, this is what Tatsuo said. And I told him, Sherman never understood why Tatsuo showed it to him, but he showed it to him. So McCarthy goes, so look at this. We've got Joe and Nakazato, who studied with Keon. We've got Tatsuo, who studied with Keon. And they're both showing this particular fist configuration. So now we've got confirmation that this is probably something that Keon taught also, being the both of them know.
When that letter or that article went out in Classified Arts magazine, I contacted Mr. Gooden there in Hawaii, Charles Gooden, and was talking to him about it, and he said, I have no doubt that Tatsuo Shimabuku trained with Kyan Chotoku, and I was like, well, that's nice to hear, but he basically said in that, you probably read the article too, that they put in it was like a 3-part article in the Classical Fighting Arts, like Karate for Milk or whatever it was.
Right.
And that Gooden wrote, and he said that of all the people that were supposed to have trained with Kyan, that the guy in Hawaii, the Tsunabe Shozen, his performance of Seisan that he witnessed, the closest that he ever saw anybody else do was Tatsuo Shimabuku. Right. So yeah, Mr. Gooden said he has no doubt that he trained with Kyan.
Well, one of the other things, like I say, like when Kichiro Sensei told me that they were off the island, so Keon dies in 45, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, okay, so during the war years, I mean, I don't know how much training's going on and stuff.
Not a whole lot. Probably between the time that the Okinawa was bombed in 44 up until about 1946 or so, they weren't really doing a whole lot.
Right. So my thing is so the Tokumini no Kun that Tatsuo is doing, I firmly believe is the original Keon Tokumini no Kun.
Yeah, it very well could be.
Well, when did he learn it?
Well, that's another thing. We don't really know. It may be late 20s or early 30s is what I'm thinking.
So now knowing that, right? So now my point is like the other Shimabukudos, they never learned it from Keon.
Yeah.
Zenro and Zempo never learned Tokumini. They learned it from Nakazato later on. And Nakazato Sensei, looking at that version of Tokumini no Kun, which I also know in practice, so I'm quite familiar with both versions, right? There's something a little lacking in that version. Like there's certain things, and one of the things like that, several first generation guys have told me too. I know Winkler said it, and I know some other people have said it too about Tatsuo, which was he mentioned that he told some of the guys, well, listen, if you want to be really good at Kobudo, you should go study with a Kobudo master. Like go study with a real Kobudo master. So Tatsuo was kind of acknowledging in a way that, well, my Kobudo's pretty good, but if you really want to really understand it, maybe you should go supplement your training and study with a Kobudo master, which makes sense to me that Tatsuo would say that because again, that's what he did.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But
Well,
my thing is, he had to have learned it pretty early. And, like I look at some of the moves in our Tokumini and like, there's no way Tatsuo thought those moves up. Like the big bow swing and everything, like he's just pulling that out of the air. I mean, I firmly believe that the version we're doing is the version that Keon taught him. And that's my belief. And I'm never gonna not believe it, and especially since, I have him on video and whatever it is, 56, whatever it is, where he's doing
58, that one that
60,
Art Smiley took, yeah.
the one where he's in the backyard.
Oh, no, that's actually in a dojo there in
Yeah, and he's
green,
in a
black, and white.
t-shirt.
That's in
And
58.
yeah, and when he does the opening, the opening's different from the
Yeah, he
opening.
like goes to the 45-degree angle and then does some other
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
so that's the original way Keon showed him,
The opening, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and then, the other thing is Andres Quast, who obviously does a lot of research on Kobudo and, especially the bow, he mentioned on the podcast that the Shishino-kun we're doing, right, which is Soishi-no-kun for other people, the way they say it, right? He said that the Taira people kind of lost that kata and they put all the pieces back together after quite a long time. He says because the way the curriculum is, only the senior people learn the more advanced kata. And he was saying that, the Isshin-Ryu Kobudo, the Isshin-Ryu Kobudo kata are all very, very difficult. They're all the higher level kata in a lot of the other in the Taira lineage,
So he and I disagree on that kata being Sueishi because the pronunciation is different. It's Sueyoshi in my estimation.
Okay.
And if you look at,
Well,
and
that you could be right. Listen, I'm not.
I can send you, and you probably have already seen it though, and maybe you just don't remember perhaps, but Mr. Bartashevitz has put out many things over the years, historical documents, and a lot of it actually corroborates what Mr. Vincula said, which is great when you got them on the same page as one another.
Right.
But they had a list of the kata, and it was from like 1963, I want to say, and they've got it misspelled as Shue Yoshi with an H in there, and they've got
Okay.
it separated as if it's two words. But it's supposed to be Sueyoshi, and that's in Japanese, which in Okinawan language, according to Hokama Sensei, is Shishi.
Right.
That's how it's pronounced.
Right.
But yeah, and then we have a flyer that, and I don't know if you've seen this one, maybe you have, but Jake Eckenrode actually gave it to me years and years ago, and I think Wayne Whalen got a copy of it at one point and put it online as well. But it's a program from a demonstration that they did, and Tatsuo is actually doing that kata, and it's got the kanji for Sueyoshi no Kon on there, which
Okay.
in common language would be Shishi Mukun.
Okay.
So
Well, it's
Soei is different.
right. So it's the same thing with. So maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong. So it could be.
Well, there's two different katas.
So I
There's
know
Soei
there. Right. There's
and,
Soishi and there's Suishi. Okay.
Sueyoshi, yeah.
And I've seen somebody do the Taira lineage one that resembles our Shishino-kun.
Yeah,
So, I've seen them do it. Again, it's a little different, but the other thing that's interesting with Isshin-Ryu with the Shishino-kun is it was always like when I started, it was always called Shishino-kun no Dai.
right. And Advincula has always said, no, you don't need to say that because there's not a die and a show version.
Right.
So there's not any need to say that. But
Right.
I didn't live in Okinawa in the 60s, so I don't know what Master Shimabuku and these other folks were actually saying.
Right. Well, the other thing is I agree with Winkler on that point because most systems that have a show have a die, right?
That's right.
And vice versa, however you want to look at it. But the other thing is that's such a big long kata. Maybe they were just saying die just because
Yes,
it's so
exactly. Yes.
ridiculously big and long and hard.
They meant that it's just the great kata because it's so long and complex as opposed
Right.
to there being a show and a die version.
Right. And Andreas Quast was also saying that form comes from like the royal a family that was warriors that was like bodyguards to the royalty in the in Okinawa. And because that's the other thing. I mean, how old are these kata?
Yeah, probably from back to the 1800s,
Right.
and then also another thing that it could be potentially is that the name, it is what you said it is, and it is what I said it is, and at some
Right.
point in time it was one pronunciation,
Right.
and then somebody misheard it, and then they just applied some kanji to it based on how it sounded to them, and then it became this whole thing that we've turned it into.
Right. Right.
People argue over it, but
Yeah. And I find it interesting too, in McCarthy's book on Keon, the one guy mentions that Keon taught, as far as weapons goes, he taught Tokumini no Kun, and then he taught side techniques. Yeah. Yeah, great book. He taught side techniques and he taught nunchaku techniques.
hmm,
And so no kata for sai and no kata for nunchaku.
right.
Which I still teach Kion no Sai as the introductory Sai kata for the
So
Isshin.
do I. So do I.
And it's especially good for the little kids. So because
Yeah,
it's an easy kata,
sure.
But so it's a good chance that Tatsuo might have made that kata too, just combining some of the techniques that Kion had taught him. I mean, have you ever heard anything or
For the Kando side.
yeah, the Kion no Sai?
So, going by what Mr. Vincula said, like you said, Kyan supposedly taught no Sai kata, but taught Sai basics. And so Tatsuo supposedly made that kata up.
Right,
So, I don't know exactly when it was, but probably maybe, 1956, 57 time frame.
right,
Because shortly thereafter he made the Kusan Kusai, and
right,
Chuck Boyd from Canada is one of the Vinculus people. He was saying that it probably was not earlier that Tatsuo made that kata, because it probably would have fallen by the wayside if it had been way earlier, but it survived up until the late 50s.
right.
So he thinks that perhaps it was not created until maybe 1956, 57 time frame.
So who were the earliest students on Okinawa training with Tatsuo? I know you have all the info because you
Well,
military.
I have a fair amount of information, but I don't have all. I wish I did, that'd be great. And that's why I told Mr. Bartashevitz, we got to have a time machine, Sensei. We go back and we can
Yeah.
really learn some things. But uh, we have Kaneshi Eiko started in like 1948. We have Tomei Yushin started in like 1947, 48 time frame. And then we also have before that was uh, his name escapes me. Oh, Kinjo Chinsaku, he started in 1947. He was supposed to have been like the senior guy, but whenever he decided he wouldn't follow Tatsuo's, splitting away and doing Isshin-Ryu and everything, he supposedly would not ever call it Isshin-Ryu. He continued to call it Short-Ryu and would never do the twist punch. Excuse me, would never do the vertical punch. He'd only do the twist punch. And after a short time, maybe like 1963, you don't really see him in the photos anymore. So he kind of went off and did his own thing. And I have seen Kinjo Chinsaku in different Shorin-ryu groups in photographs and old photographs from way
Okay.
back then. So, but yeah, some of those older guys like Shigema Genyu and Kaneshiro Kenji, they started in the like the early 50s. I think Kaneshiro started in like 1951 or something, and Shigema started in like 53, and some of the other locals they trained. Odo Seikichi was supposed to have trained with Tatsuo too briefly at some
Yes.
point. I mean, we don't
Yeah.
know the exact years on that, but who else? Toma Shion of Seido-kan was supposed to have trained with him too, very briefly. There was an article in that Bugeisha magazine that they revived. There used to be Angel Lemus's magazine or
Uh-huh.
Walter's magazine. That's they had a two-part article on Toma Shion in that, and in the first part of it, they mentioned him having trained with Shimabuku, and I was thinking, oh, this is nice. They're going to go into a little more detail in the second part of the article. Well, they never did, so that was kind of disappointing.
So is that Seiki Toma?
No, no, there's two different individuals. There's a Toma Shion and a Toma Seiki, and I
Okay.
think they may have been related to one another, but I don't know how.
Now, did Toma Seiki also train with Tatsuo?
I think he did, but again, I
Isn't
don't.
that the guy Walter Van Gilson went to train with after Tatsuo passed away?
Right, exactly, exactly.
Because Walter told me that that Seiki Toma trained with Tatsuo, and that was one of the reasons he went to train with him.
Right.
So
So these guys that did that, they would have, it probably would have been in the late 40s and into the early to mid 50s. But certainly by the time that the Americans were getting involved in 1955, that was no more. They were off doing their own things and had already chosen their preferred arts, I guess.
right. And Kinjo Kensaku, he was the one that had the incident in Okinawa.
Yeah, so I heard he killed somebody with a
Yeah.
kick, and they put him in jail. And Tatsuo got up a bunch of character witnesses
Yeah.
basically, and they were able to get him out.
Yeah, that's what Harold Mitchum told us. I mean, I trained with Harold Mitchum a couple of times, and that story came up. And Harold Mitchum said he said to us he was on the island at the time. So Mitchum was there supposedly, not when he did it, but he was on the island, so he was aware of what was going on and what happened. And he heard two versions. He heard he kicked the guy, and the other one he heard that he hit the guy with a punch.
Oh, well.
You know,
Either
and
one of them are believable as far as I'm concerned.
yeah, yeah, and supposedly that's what they said. They said that whatchamacallit, that Tatsuo managed to get together a whole bunch of people to kind of help and kind of smooth things over or whatever. But
And I've tried to go and visit Mr. Kinjo, but by the time I actually did and finally found out where his house was, he was already gone. He was not living there anymore. His house
okay,
was had a padlock around the gate, and it was a beautiful old style Okinawan home.
okay,
It was vacant for a number of years, and then finally I saw a bulldozer had broken through the wall around his property, and I said, "Oh my goodness, they're getting ready to tear this house down." And
right.
sure, they did within short order. So that was real sad to see that go.
So it's interesting when we talk about early students, right? So Eiko Kanishi, I have some students on my channel doing kata in his dojo.
Cool.
Now,
I tried
it's
briefly.
so the interesting thing is, Anguizu has some different variations on how he does the kata. Like when he does the double block in Seisan, he goes off on an angle. He brings the feet together. When he comes out, does the head block back fist, right? That's exactly the way the Eiko Kanishi students do it.
So that's interesting. I didn't see them do that when I trained there. So the dojo that I went and worked out with, like my last 3 months in Okinawa in 2012, before I went to Korea, it was Shigema Genyu's dojo, and they had a picture of Kaneshi in there because he was their senior that they kind of rallied behind.
Yeah.
And also, they had a picture of Tatsuo in there because he had been their teacher as well at one point before they split away. But yeah, they were doing Sun Tzu in there, so that was cool. But of course, they I guess changed it back to it had less of an Isshin-Ryu flair to it, more of a Shorin-Ryu flair to it.
Well, I'd heard that there's several Shorin schools practicing Sun Tzu.
I've seen the one. I'm not going to say there's not any, but I only ever saw the one.
Okay. So, but yeah, I just found it interesting because Angi made those changes. He was saying when he was here in the early 70s that Tatsuo changed, but I don't think Tatsuo ever changed. I think that was, again, and it's fine if Angi Uezu adds that flavor to it. I mean, he's a senior Dan, he can do whatever he wants.
I
But
think
go
I
ahead.
think that he had like everybody really does truly has their own way of moving, and even though
Right.
we try to mimic our teachers to a large degree, it's not necessarily always going to look the same.
No.
But I don't know that in the early days, at least, that he actually consciously or purposely made changes to Tatsuo's karate. I
Right.
think that perhaps after Tatsuo died, he kind of took some license with it, which that's
Right.
actually a very Okinawan thing to do, as
Right.
you probably are aware. Once these guys kind of did their own thing or were in
Oh.
charge of their own stuff, that's when they did their own thing with it.
Well, even like Mariyoshi Kobudo, which I've been studying a very long time too. I mean, some of the kata that are still practiced were created by students.
Yeah.
Like Mariyoshi Sensei would, a student would do something and Mariyoshi Sensei would say, "Oh, good. Oh, yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah, do that." And so some people practice those kata and some people don't. But it was interesting too. Like Mariyoshi Sensei, he heard about a bow kata being practiced called Ufuten, and he sent three of his students to go learn that kata. He says, "Oh, go learn that kata." So, in terms of certain things, it's kind of interesting. And even when I first went to Okinawa in the early 90s, and Kichiro Shimabuku said to me the first time I was there, he said, "Go out and make your own strong Isshin-Ryu." He says, "Go out and study with everybody that's better than you. Take what you like from each person and make your own strong Isshin-Ryu." And
Yeah.
I was shocked when he said that, and I'll tell you why. Because the American I was training with was the complete opposite.
I know who you were training with, I think.
Meaning, okay, I know everything. I know everything. You don't have to go to anybody else. And I'll illustrate it with a quick story. So the Wazoo videos come out. from Panther Productions. Okay, so me being a martial arts lunatic, right? I order them right away. And I'm like, oh my God, look at this. We can see Angi Weizu. And, as a kid, you look at Angi Weizu, you look at Tatsuo, you see these films, right? And, you're thinking, oh my God, these guys are like gods, right? I mean, oh my God, if one day I could do that, right?
Yeah.
And so now Nick Adler puts out a thing. There's a thing in Black Belt Magazine that Angi Weizu is going to be in Long Island doing a seminar. So I go right to my instructor. I says, oh, Angi Weizu is going to be in Long Island. We're going, right? He goes, I can teach you everything. And I look at him and I go, well, I'm going. Like I was already a bit of a rebel. And I was like, oh, I'm going. Like, I'm like, okay, you're showing me these videos of Angi and Tatsuo all these years, telling me how great they are. You're telling me stories basically about,
Yeah.
and I'm like, well, I'm going, So
And
I
then
went
when
out.
it was in your backyard, practically, he's trying to
Yeah.
discourage you from going.
And I went, and that's when I first met Angi and Angi Weizu. And Adler was nice enough, Nick Adler, who knows me since I'm 15, was nice enough to introduce me to him. And I became friendly with Angi Weizu. I attended a lot of his seminars when he went by John Devine's. He was nice enough one time, he gave me one of his chief instructor patches. And
Oh, cool.
he knew I was a student of Kichiro. And I tried to train with as many of them as I could.
And I think that's the right attitude and the right way of going about it. I think we're all on the same team here. Everybody should be and try to get along and
Well,
understand one another better.
it's funny you say that, right? So in 97, Master Shimabuku asked me to come to Okinawa to represent his dojo for the grand opening of the Budokan.
Mhm.
Okay. So Wichi Sensei is representing Angi's dojo, right?
Mhm.
And so they're in line ahead of us. So they're going up, they're doing Seisan, and then we're going up, we're doing Sun Tzu. So Wichi has a lot of the Americans there with him, like, and so Wichi sees me behind him and he goes, Michael, he comes over, he gives me gives me a hug, I'm shaking hands, right? I'm introducing him to my students. The Kichiro guys are saying hi to him, everybody's friendly, right? And then he says, Michael, meet my son. His son was a green belt at the time. He brings his son over, we're shaking his son's hands, but I'll never forget the looks that we were getting from some of the American Angi students, like the daggers staring. And I just like, I don't get it. Like
I don't either. It's like, I think some people think that perhaps maybe because the teachers had some sort of quarrel with each other at one point, that the students are supposed to keep that going in perpetuity. It's like, why? If your teacher had a complaint, and it may be a legitimate complaint with somebody else, why do we have to keep that going 30, 40
well,
years later?
prime example is me and my first instructor, right? I mean, things got very ugly there, right? Kichiro kept in contact with both of us. And I had no problem with that because again, Kichiro's the head of the system, right? So I look at it as like he's the father, and you're gonna have brothers and sons that fight, right? And maybe not get along. And he's gotta kind of just, whatever. But and even when the first time I met Wichi and he saw me do karate. He was extremely complimentary of my karate, and he took me on the side and was saying, I was a student of Kichiro's, which was going, Michael. I said, Sensei, I know your background. I know who you train with, So, so yeah, I try to get along with all of them. I mean, look, I loved Angi Weizu. I mean, I think he did a lot for Isshin-Ryu.
Oh yeah, you got
I
to
think,
respect the work he put
yeah, I
in.
think he did a lot for Isshin-Ryu. I think, but even Kichiro one time said to me, I asked Kichiro Sensei one time, are you going to do an anniversary thing? I forget which anniversary was asking him about. And he says, I don't think so. He says, there's not too much Isshin-Ryu on Okinawa. He goes, most of it's in the United States, you know. The funny thing is though, is now it's really gotten big, not just in the United States. It's really big. It's all everywhere. I mean, there's dojo in Russia. There's dojo all over Europe now. You've got a lot of Isshin-Ryu in South America. I mean, so it's crazy. It's crazy how it's spread.
But wouldn't it be nice though if we could keep it going in Okinawa? I mean, I
I
really wish
agree. Yeah, I agree.
And I know some people just were in disbelief when I said it, but I've been saying it for years. The assessment I got was, back in like 2008, 2009 timeframe when I was new to Okinawa, it's like, there's only two folks here who's teaching this anymore. And that's sad to me. And I
Right.
think that in a quarter century, it's going to be extinct.
Yeah.
And now we're 15 years more into this, and I think maybe within the next decade even it's going to go extinct.
Yeah, it could. It could. And again, I don't know what the answer is. And it's I train in a lot of different arts, and I'm senior in a lot of different arts. And so Isshin-Ryu is not the only art I do that has this problem. Um, so again, I've thought about it a lot, and I just don't know what the answer is. I just don't know. And some of it, and I'm sure you're aware that this is going on. So there are some Okinawan sensei that are that have handed the art to a Westerner as to succeed them. And it's some of the same stuff's going on in Japan, where they've handed the art to a Westerner to succeed them. Now it's not often, but when I started in '79, if you told me that would ever happen, I would have told you were out of your mind. Like
Yeah,
that would
yeah.
never happen, right? And I think some of them are realizing, well, okay, I don't want it to die. I want it to continue. So if it's not going to continue here, well, at least it's going to continue. So I don't know what the answer is. I mean,
Well,
even in the case, Kichiro Shimabuku's in phenomenal shape. Oh my God. I mean,
well,
his physical shape is, 2019, when he got to London, we were having the World Championships. When I went to dinner with him the first night, I said, Sensei, what'd you do today? He goes, oh, this morning I went out and I ran to the right. So he leaves the hotel and he's going on a run. He still runs. Now he's 83. So back then he was like 79 or 78. And he's running in the streets of London, like going for a jog. And so, in terms of that, he's in great shape. And I think the mother lived to what? She was over 100, right?
it's
Was she?
100. I think she was about 100 when she finally died. Yeah.
Okay. So, hopefully he's around for a lot longer. And but I don't know what the answer is.
Do you, and maybe you don't want to say on this forum here, but do you know potentially what is going to happen with the IWKA with Master
I don't
Shimabuku?
know 100%. I did ask him, but it was quite a long time ago. He had mentioned his son, and my response was, well, his son trained for a long time, but then he hasn't trained in a long time because he's a doctor. He just doesn't, he's a emergency room doctor. I met him once. He let he let us borrow his van. So Master Shimabuku was driving us around with his son's van. Might he take over and be like more of a figurehead? That's quite possible. One of the arts I study, Katori Shinto-ryu, which has a 600-year tradition in Japan, the current soke of that art does not train in the art, but he's the unbroken line going back 600 years. So what he has master instructors that teach the art. So in the case of Katori, you have the otakes that are teaching the art, and you have the Suginos that are teaching the art. They're both recognized by the soke. And, people, again, it's funny, we talk about this kind of stuff within, right? So there's a lot of the Westerners that study with the otake, they like to say, oh, we're the only recognized group. The Sugino group's not recognized. Okay, but I had dinner with the soke. I had dinner with him. He came, and I was lucky enough, Sugino let me come over, got to meet him, talk with him. Then the soke invited us to his house, and I got to see the 500-year-old Katori dojo that's at the house. So again, the funny thing is like with the two head guys, like Sugino and Otake, there's no animosity there. Those guys are friends, right? But
Yeah.
it's sometimes it's the Westerners, because the Westerners don't understand the culture.
No, no, and sadly, a lot of them, they have zero interest in trying to ever learn about the culture, which would clear up a lot of these problems, But they're just they love to rest on what they learned, even if the information came, 4, 5, 6 generations, down the line from when they started, and it's
Right.
like distorted in some fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just find it interesting. Like I'm always ranting about people's use of titles.
Oh yeah, I remember. I just listened to your last podcast, not your last one, but the one before about all the titles and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
agree with all that, you know.
like I literally, if I'm at an event and someone comes up and calls me Hanshi, I immediately correct them.
Mm,
I'm at the point where I just don't care anymore. I just say, listen, it's nice that you call me that, but don't call me that. Call me sensei. you
yeah.
know. And I remember when I first sat down with Kichiro Shimabuku in Okinawa, I said to him, I said, Sensei, what should I call you? And he looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, Mike, you call me Sensei. And then
Yeah,
he added, he goes, Mike, you're Sensei, I'm Sensei too. And at the time I was Nidan. And he goes, I'm 10th Dan, you're Nidan. We both have to practice. That's literally what Kichiro said to me.
yeah,
And yeah, and it makes total sense. And the thing is it strikes me as funny. It's like people use martial arts as a vehicle to gratify their ego a little too much.
yeah,
And
I would agree with that.
yeah, and the thing is like, okay, so you become Renshi, right? And now I want to be called Renshi. Okay, but Renshi's not a verbal title. I've never heard anybody call that in Japan, you know.
Yeah,
And and again, like, it's nice that you get Renshi and stuff, but what does it really mean? It's just your teacher patting you on the back saying, "Attaboy, good job, appreciate what you're doing," right? But we, especially people in the West, they attach so much more importance to these things.
yeah, and I understand that they want to be respectful, and with our culture, we try to properly show someone respect by saying Mr. or Doctor or Professor
Right,
or whatever.
right,
So that's why they're doing that. But it's
right,
like, but that's not how the Okinawan culture is.
right.
And if you're doing this Okinawan art, what's keeping you from learning and emulating what the Okinawans truly do if you say that you care so much about this Okinawan art?
Right. So even in the Japanese arts, I've only heard two terms used within a dojo to refer to the head instructor. And that term is obviously sensei. And the
Yeah.
other one I've heard is kancho.
I've heard that, and I've heard Taicho also, but
Yeah.
largely
Yeah.
Kancho.
So Kancho is the head of the dojo or whatever. So, the one dojo I trained in Japan, we called him Kancho, right? But there were other eighth dans in that dojo, and I call them sensei. I mean, because
Yeah.
obviously, they were so senior, right? And even in my dojo in New York, where you have some guys that are seventh dans, some of the lower ranked black belts and the white belts and junior grades, they call most of the black belts sensei. And I never took that like, oh, you shouldn't call him sensei because I'm sensei, No, it's like
There's not a degree of
yeah, it's
sensei.
all, yeah, that
It's
I mean
not
to me
less
that's
or more
yeah,
respectful.
yeah, it's all it's all BS, this kind of thought process in terms of that, you know.
Yeah, and
Um
I keep telling people that also the word is not a title either. It's a generic term, as you said, and as I've known for many years myself, it just basically means one who's gone before.
yeah, that's
And
it.
they call any manner of professionals in Japanese and Okinawan society sensei. It's not really a title.
I studied bonsai a
Yeah,
few years, and the guy who I trained with was a
it's
Westerner, but he
expensive.
trained in he trained in Japan, and he was well known. He had bonsai trees at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. I mean, this guy was the real deal. I called him sensei.
Yeah, I'm sure you
Yeah, I
did.
called him sensei. One of my college professors was Japanese. He knew I did martial arts, and I called him sensei. you
Yeah,
know and so yeah, I mean, it's just again, it's a thing of respect. But the misuse of, it's the same thing on Facebook, like, people put Renshi so and so as their Facebook name, Hanshi so and so as their Facebook name. And I say all the time, I'd rather have someone call me Mike than me force them to call me a title when they're really thinking asshole, you know And so I have some students that'll only call me sensei. I mean, they'll only, no matter where we are. And then other students, if we're outside at a restaurant or something, they might call me Mike. I could care less. I mean, I
yeah.
don't, I remember I had family that came on a trip in 97. Oh, excuse me, 94. So there were parents that came with kids. They didn't train. The parents didn't do karate. And I remember when Master Shimabuku introduced himself, he introduced himself as Kichiro.
Ah,
And so later on, the parents come to me and go, Sensei, he introduced himself. He said Kichiro. And I looked at them and they go, we should only call him Sensei, right? I said, yeah, just call him Sensei.
yeah,
Just call him Sensei. But
yeah.
it goes to show that, yeah,
Well, that's good.
yeah.
But you were talking about how he was encouraging you to learn from various places and make your own strong karate. And so that's really that kind of goes along with what I was told that Tom Lewis once told his student Victor Smith. And that was, for like your first 20 years, you're doing your teacher's karate, but then after that, you're doing your karate.
Yeah.
See, there you go.
Yeah. And in my case, I've gone back to China. So, I'm senior and done trained in two serious Chinese martial arts for a long time now. And I told Andreas Quast the story where my feeding crane master actually said to me, he was lamenting what happened to karate, like what happened to karate's power. That karate used to have more power. And I said, well, when the emphasis becomes about sport, you don't need power. And that's part of the problem right
Yeah.
now that I think is going on in Okinawa, which is such a big emphasis on sport. And I get it because it's very safe there and you don't have to really worry about someone trying to harm you like you might have to do in the West or certain other countries. But I think karate loses something when you take that out of the equation. And, going back to like a karate sensei who knew how to fight, we talk about Motobu, right? And, one of the things Sherman Harold pointed out to me, I want to get your opinion on this, and I don't know if anyone's ever mentioned it, that, Sherman Harold firmly believed that some of the Motobu fighting techniques are in Sun Tzu. And if you look at the fighting drills of Motobu, and then you look at a few of the moves in Sun Tzu, it's pretty close. It's
Well,
pretty close.
I mean, I think I might need to have it more, pointed out at what specific ones you may be talking about.
Well, the
Okay.
double punch, one of Motobu's drills, he does a double punch.
Well, that segment is out of Pasai,
I
though.
know it's in Pasai too.
Yeah.
I know,
So
so that's the other place it could come
yeah,
from. Right.
yeah. So I think some of those, came from the other kata and that he kept, and some that he didn't keep for the system, and so on. But I think that Tatsuo probably got the notion to have a set of kumite techniques from Motobu Shoki, and of
Right.
course, Motobu had like 12 of them, I believe, and then Tatsuo did his own thing and had like 45 or 46 or whatever of them, So I think he
Now,
got that.
are you when you're talking about those Tatsuo techniques, you're talking about like the secret scroll techniques?
Oh, yeah, yeah, that Armstrong called the secret scrolls,
By the way,
But
can we just touch on that book quick? Let's touch on that book quick.
which one? The Armstrong's Blue
The
Book?
Armstrong Blue Book.
Yeah.
So I get that book. I'm obviously young in Isshin-Ryu, and I'm reading that book. And the front of each chapter is like this.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a fanciful story, and
Oh my,
but he even
it's
says it though, but I think some people missed that part where he said it that these are
right,
made up
right.
stories.
But you read that, it's like, oh
Yeah,
my God, this is unbelievable. Like,
yeah,
like
yeah.
as a teenager, I'm reading it. I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
wow, right. But okay. But again, yeah, it's funny. The things begin to intermingle.
Mhm.
So the created stuff becomes the real stuff.
That's what people believe really happened on some of that. And I was like, yeah, but did you miss the part where he said that this is made up?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
It
But
was to illustrate a feeling or a point or something, and I'm not sure I always got the point that he was trying to get across when I was reading it, but he said he made them up, some of
right.
that stuff.
And so who was the earliest American student on Okinawa?
So there were, according to this interview with Don Nagel in, I forget what year it was, but it was in the 90s. You've probably seen it on YouTube. He's sitting there with Michael Lonko, I
Yeah,
think it is.
yeah.
And really bad audio quality. You got to turn it up real loud to hear it. But he was saying that there were people that trained with Master Shimabuku before he did, but basically when they came back to the States after their time in Okinawa, they didn't do anything with it.
Right,
And that's got to be the case because we would have known who they were, but
right,
they have not done anything with it. So,
right.
but Mr. Nagel was, the first that we know of to actually teach it when he came back. But he even says it in his interview there that he had intended to give it up too, just like the other folks had done. And it was Mr. Cates that had talked him into teaching there at Jacksonville. And so that's how that got started. But, I did some research into the history of the Marine Corps in Okinawa, and the first units, they started coming down from mainland Japan in February of 1955. So the 3rd Marine Division that's there now, they were in World War II, and then they disbanded, and then they reestablished the 3rd Marine Division at Camp Pendleton, California in like 1952. And by the time they got them up to like battalion strength or division strength or whatever, the armistice was signed, so they didn't really need them anymore. So they put them in mainland Japan to augment the 1st Marine Division. And then by 1955, I guess the Marine Corps decided it was getting too crowded, so they sent them down to Okinawa, and that's where they've been ever since. The way the Marine Corps is comprised today, you got the 1st Marine Division at Camp Pendleton, you have the 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and the 3rd Marine Division is in Okinawa, and then you have the 4th Marine Division, which is the reserves, the Marine Corps Reserve. But at any rate, so those guys came down and started building the bases and stuff, and they were like a tent city in Kawasaki Village, and a tent city in Tengan Village, and then they turned it, into more real structures, and it became Camp Courtney there in Tengan Village, and it became Camp Maturius in Kawasaki Village, and then the rest is history. People started coming in probably mid to late 1955 in bigger numbers, and at some point in time, this is only two ways that I can think of that they came across Master Shimabuku. Is either they saw him putting on a demonstration in town somewhere, or they were, just on liberty walking around and they happened to come across his house and he's teaching his folks in the yard there.
Right.
And, oh, what's this? And they
Right.
started in like that. But that 1956, according to Advincula, he got a lot of his information from Shinsho and stuff, and he said that when Tatsuo called that meeting in January the 15th of 56 to say we're going to name the system this now, and we're going to use this punch, and all that, that there were like a handful of Americans there, but they had no problem switching over from the twist punch that he had been teaching because they were new. So, the first Americans really didn't start until like mid to late 1955, and then into 56 there was a few of them. And then in that May of 1956 photo that I know you had to have seen, there's an American in the back. Kichiro is in there too,
Right.
and he's in school uniform. And it's the same picture that's got Eizo Shimabuku in there, and I think Kenjo Chinsaku's in there, and Eshi's in there too. And there's a tall American in the back. I think that guy's name, I don't know, I can't prove it, but I think that may be A.C. Cooper.
Okay.
So he's one of the earliest, but because we got just his initials, I'll never know what his real name is. And
Right.
Armstrong mentioned him in a letter one time to Jake Eckenrode that I have a copy of. And he said that he was in California, that he made contact with A.C. Cooper in California. And this is in 1960, by the way. But I can't find an A.C. Cooper. Was he, did he go on and retire from the Marine Corps? Did he just do 4 or 5 years and then get out? You can not hope to find somebody with just the initials A.C.
Right.
And Cooper's a relatively common surname. So
right. So Nagel is the earliest as far as like the big
as far as
guys.
Teaching goes, yeah. So he did not get to Okinawa until mid-July of 1956.
Okay.
And I know that the common notion is that he started around the time that he got there. But when I talked to Art Smiley years ago, he said that yes, that Nagel was senior to him and had introduced him to Master Shimabuku, but he was only about 2 months senior to him in the dojo. So I think that you may have seen this date bandied about too, that it was supposed to have been in like February of 1956 that Mr. Nagel started. Well, I think he was off by a year, and it's actually February of 57.
Okay.
So that basically means, if that's an accurate guess, that Nagel didn't start with Tatsuo until about halfway through his tour.
Okay.
And he only trained with the founder about 7 months because he left Okinawa in early September of 1957. And then when he got back to the States, it was about 2 weeks on the ship to go back. And then they either put him on a bus or put him on a train with the other Marines and sent him back across the country. And he probably went home a little bit for like a couple of weeks or whatever on leave, because they wouldn't let you go on leave in Okinawa in those days unless it was emergency leave or something,
Right.
But anyway, he did not check into his unit in Jacksonville at Camp Lejeune until like November the 12th or something like that of 1957. So if he started teaching at that time, it's possible, but I think that with the holidays quickly approaching, I really don't know that he got started teaching in 1957. Possible,
Right.
but I really think the majority of his students bear out the notion that he didn't really start teaching until about January 1958.
Okay.
Because you had Ed McGrath came in later, and you had Jim Chapman was there, and you had Rip Naimura that was there. Naimura was actually already there before Nagel was, and then Nagel came in a little bit later.
So who was there before Nagel?
He was already stationed.
Okay.
Mr. Nagel was already stationed there at Camp Lejeune,
Okay.
and I think September of 57. And so, but the majority of the early guys like Chapman and Mr. McGrath and oh gosh, I can't think of the other folks' names at the moment, but Clarence Ewing, some of those guys didn't start later on. But actually I think that Ed McGrath didn't start until about January of 1959, to be honest, because Nagel's standard seemed to be about 8 or 9 months of training to make black belt, and Mr. McGrath made black belt in September of 1959, like just within a few days of when Nagel got out of the Marines and went back home. So
Right.
I think that he didn't start till 59. But yeah, those early guys like Chapman and Naimira, they were supposed to have been his first two black belts, and I think that Jim Chapman was the first black belt.
So now, so Chapman and McGrath, they were on Okinawa or they weren't on Okinawa?
Mr. Chapman was not. Mr. McGrath was not. Now I don't
Yeah.
have Mr. McGrath's service record, but what I have been able to glean is that he was a Marine Corps officer and was only in the service for like 2 years, 3 years, something like that, because he had a leg injury, a knee injury or something that took him out of commission basically, and he resigned his commission and so on. But yeah, I think I forget when he got his commission. I think it was supposed to have been in like November of '57 or something.
Right.
So yeah,
So
that's why
did you ever meet McGrath?
I did not. I talked to
Yeah.
him via email a couple of times way back when, but I would like to have met the gentleman.
Yeah, I was asked to attend a meeting. He asked a bunch of senior Isshin-Ryu people to attend a group meeting. I mean, I can't remember the year. Adler would probably remember, but it was about 20 years ago. Adler called me and he says, "Hey, we want you to come to this." I said, "Okay." And what he was trying to do is he was trying to get everybody in the East Coast area basically to kind of get on the same page with the kata. So, I went there. I think at the time I was Godon, and I'm standing in the back. I'm not interested in being. I'm in the back, and I knew a lot of guys there. Nick Adler I know very well, and I had met McGrath before. There was a bunch of other guys from Jersey. Ralph Pissarro I'm friendly with, and a bunch of different people. But they started having the meeting, and McGrath asked the question, "Well, does anybody know how they're doing the kata on Okinawa?" And like I said, I was in the back, and Nick Adler gave me up right away. He goes, "Well, Mr. Calandra's here, and he's a student of Kichido's." And I was with one of my students, and I turned to my student, and I go, "Boy, he gave me up right away, huh?" So now, Ed McGrath asked me to come out, and so he said, "Mike, could you show how you're doing it? Doing it." So I showed him, right, and I said, "Listen, with all due respect," I said, "I don't think it matters if you're doing the kata, if we're all doing the kata exactly the same. I think what matters is, do you have balance? Do you have speed? Do you have power?" I said, if there's little differences in the kata, I said, I can tell you now, they don't seem to care on Okinawa. I think that's the key. Like, is your karate powerful? Like, is it?
That's basically what I tell my students.
Yeah,
It's like, number one, it has to be functional first and
yeah,
foremost, and then you can argue about the historicity of it,
right, right.
but that still doesn't take trump the fact that it's
Right.
got the
Yeah.
hurt.
And out of the hundreds of people that tried to kill me in my career as a police officer, no one ever asked me when Tatsuo was born.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and again, like nerds like me and you, right?
Yeah.
That we're into all this crap, right?
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
want to know everything, right?
Right.
Like I jokingly say to people sometimes, I go, "Well, yeah, I know you want to know who farted on Tatsuo's floor in such and such year and such time, but can you throw a punch?" Well,
Yeah.
so again, the history is great, but again, it's got to be kept in perspective because we're never going to know the answer to a lot of the questions.
Right. Yeah, there's so many things we'll never know and we can only guess about. It's just the way that it is. Too much time passed before people really started taking an intense interest in these types of things that we would like to talk about. And it would be nice if we could have preserved a lot more, but we should be happy to have what we have.
Yeah. Did you ever meet Nagel?
I did not meet Mr. Nagel, unfortunately, because I'm from Louisiana originally, and I
Right.
didn't get started in Isshin-Ryu until 1993. And just a few years from then is when some of these folks started passing away.
Right. So
And
I trained with him in a couple of seminars.
mhm,
Was introduced to him, got to speak with him. He's a character, right? But again, so when I met him, I was already a cop, right? So obviously he's a cop, right? So there's that kind of mutual thing right off the bat. And I mean, I got along with him fine. I thought he was a good guy. I attended the seminar that him and Advincula put together on in Jersey.
no, that was in '95, I believe.
Wow. That was pretty interesting.
I know a gentleman who was there. Yeah, he was John Saremba. Do you know him?
No, I don't think I
He-
I might
He's a
know him by
student,
face.
he's a student of Dennis Hoare.
Okay. Oh, I probably, if look, I got to know him by face because
Yeah, you
Dennis, I
probably
know Dennis is another one of those guys I really like in Isshin-Ryu.
Yep.
So,
Super nice gentleman, and
yeah.
he was a civilian contractor or something in Okinawa, and he would come to my class at Kadena
Okay.
Air Base on fairly regular occasion, and he'd spar with my students and stuff. And he's a pretty spry guy, for being the age that he is. And but he was a sixth dan under Mr. Hoare and trained with Mr. Nagel as well and stuff. So it was great to hear the stories and all that kind of stuff. Because I really believe, hey, we're all on the same team here. We need to
Yeah,
do.
I mean, I got to be honest with you. Even within the IWK, there's some people that think, oh, well, that person's in that association, and frankly, I don't play that game. I got friends everywhere in Isshinryu, and
Yeah,
my
I do too.
yeah, and my thing is uh, what do I care what patch you wear? What do I care? So I mean, those are all things that just don't matter that much. Um,
Yeah, that's
so
right.
when was like when did Mitchum get there? Who are some of the guys that spent the most time on Okinawa? Now I know
So
Advincula obviously is one of them, right?
a big bit of research into this, and of the five Americans that trained the longest with Master Shimabuku, you got Lewis King as number one, Bill Blond is number two, and then probably Harold Mitchum is number three, and then John Bartashevitz is number four, and then Mr. Advincula is number five.
Right.
And it's not to cut any of them down or downplay any of their contributions or anything
Sure.
like that whatsoever. But the fact of the matter is you had Mr. Bond and Mr. King, both of them got out of the Marine Corps after having been stationed there. So they already had some time while they were in the service, and then they got out and stayed there. And
Okay.
so Mr. King, I finally, thank goodness, I was able to get in touch with him before he passed away. And for years, I would meet with Mr. Bond when he would come to Okinawa too, because his wife is Okinawan, and they would visit, her family for 2 or 3 months out of the year, most years. So I would pick his brain all the time. And so he said that when he left in July of 1967, that Mr. King was still there, and the photos bear that out. There's even a photo from at least as late as 1968 that's supposed to be Bill Steigner's going away party there in the dojo, and there's King sitting there in his gi and
Okay.
everything. Right? And so anyway, Mr. Bond,
We just lost him.
oh, Mr. King passed. Oh, Steigner, yeah, he
Yeah,
died, and
and
yeah,
he was another great. Oh my God, what a
yeah,
great guy.
yeah. I had some email correspondence with him a couple of times. He was very nice,
I
and
met
I
him.
wish I could have met him.
I met
Yeah.
him. He came to train with my Kobudo master when I had
Oh,
Gakiya
cool.
Sensei in, and it was great. I met him twice actually. I met him there, and I met him in California in the Vinkla thing, and it was
Mhm.
fantastic. I got to ask him about Tatsuo, and I don't want to interrupt you. I want you to keep going with this,
Sure.
but I just want to mention this. He told me that Tatsuo suggested to him that he should go to study Goju.
Well, yeah, I,
He
I
said because of the
don't.
way Bill was kind of built.
Yeah,
And I found that fascinating that Tatsuo would suggest he go train in something else that he thought that might be better for him.
that
So,
sounds right. I
yeah.
mean, well,
But he was, I could tell you now.
a good teacher, as you
Yeah.
know, is going to want
Oh
their
yeah.
students to be at least as good as they are or better. I mean, you're
Yeah.
not training your
Yeah.
students to be worse than
Yeah.
you.
And Bill Steigner, was, again, one of those guys that, no negative words about people, super nice guy. Really, really, really good guy. So it's sad that he passed away. So,
Yeah. Let's see. But like I said, King and Blonde, they worked together for a while, one of the bases, and they were friendly aside from that, outside of working hours as well. And Mr. Blonde said that when he left to go back to the States, he eventually knew that King had gone back to the States because King would call his house every year, couple of years or whatever, but it was coincidentally every time he called, he was out of the house, and Bill's wife would answer the phone, and Mr. King would not leave a forwarding number for him to get in touch with him. And so finally, in about 2015 or something, or maybe early 2016, he called and Bill was home and answered the phone. And so all this time in the years up to that point, I've told Bill, okay, if you ever get a hold of him, I want to know X, Y, and Z. Can you please ask him these
right.
questions immediately? And sure enough, so one of those questions was, how long did you stay in Okinawa? And he said that he was in Okinawa until June of 1974. And the thing was, is he was so deathly afraid of flying that that's why he kept staying and staying and staying, is because he knew that with him being no longer in the Marine Corps, that they'd have to send him back on the plane, and he was afraid of flying. So the only flight he ever took was the one to send him back to the States in '74.
Okay.
I don't know how long he trained per se, but like I said, we got him in the dojo photo in his uniform, karate gi, up into 1968, with him having started in like 1960. So that's, way, blows everybody else practically out of the water.
Right.
And so there's that. Now he told me, because I talked to him on the phone one time, I called him myself, and I had planned to go visit him, but it didn't work out. And he passed away just a couple of months later in a fluke thing from having surgery. And so anyway, um, he got a fourth dan from Tatsuo, but he was not one of those guys that got like the big inflated dan ranks.
Right.
And then they did away with that anyway in 1961, as I'm sure you're aware too.
Right.
So it's kind of a moot point anyway. But yeah, so he was a fourth dan, but he trained, a good solid 7, 8 years with the founder probably.
Okay.
And then we know that Tatsuo didn't retire until like 1972. So potentially he could have trained with Tatsuo all the way up
Right.
till then,
Right.
So those types of things, I don't know if he continued on beyond 1968. I don't believe that I've ever heard Mr. Bartashevitz or Mr. Vincula mention King still being around the dojo in those days, because they were there in the early 70s, but it's possible, I guess. But then Mr. Blonde, like I said, he's number two. He told me that when he got to Okinawa in February of '58, he did not train with Tatsuo. He did not start training with Tatsuo actually until December of 1959, about 9 days before Ed Johnson started. I don't know
Okay.
how he didn't know about the lessons or why he didn't start or whatever, but he's
Right.
never tried to claim that he was training when he was not. And so if you take from like December of '59 up until July of '67, and then take out the time that Tatsuo was in the States in '64 and in '66, and Bill said the only time that he left Okinawa during that whole time was about 3 weeks in 1965. So all that you take off, it leaves with about 7 years. So he still has about 7 years with Tatsuo, so that's a lot.
Yeah. And the other thing is, you having been there and been in the military, I mean, I don't think they were training 8 hours a day.
No, like Mitchum said one time, I read that he said this, is like, that we had jobs, they
Right.
had to go to work for a certain number of hours. And then on top of that, Bill told me, so it was a physical impossibility for people to be going out in town in those earliest days in Okinawa, because they had what they call port and starboard liberty. So a
Okay.
port, like a two duty section thing, and it was so that everybody would be fair in the amount of time off from work they got, So
Right.
one day it would be this team, if you will, would have time off, and then the next day it'd be the other team, and then the other team would have to be, on the base or whatever. So they were letting them go in shifts, in other words, to have time off the base and so on. Now, if they were training when they got back onto the base and they had a designated area, I'm not going to say they weren't doing that.
Right.
Maybe they were foregoing some sleep to continue to train, but no,
Right.
they were not out. And on top of the port and starboard liberty, they also had what they also called Cinderella liberty. So they all had to be back into the base by midnight, or they're going to be in big trouble. So they had a curfew that they had to abide by. So
So I'm gonna tell you a story. I don't think I've told it on the podcast yet. So I study Sosui Shitsuru Jiu-Jitsu, and I've studied it for a long time. It's my third most senior art. So I was asked to come out to Oregon one time to do a seminar for a group of jiu-jitsu guys out there, and the person who ran the dojo out there was a guy by the name of James Burgess. And James Burgess, by the time I met him, was in his 70s. He was a bomber in World War II, so he was one of the guys that bombed Tokyo. I have his photos from World War II. I have photos of his plane after it was hit, and you see the trails of smoke and stuff. And I have photos of him on Okinawa after we occupied it, after the Battle of Okinawa. So he was in the Air Force, and he's on Okinawa, and he's part of the early occupying force. And our government's setting up, obviously, camps for the military. They got to feed them. They're trying to feed the Okinawans too. They're trying to, okay.
Restart their whole economy and everything.
So the Okinawans are working in the mess hall. Some young Okinawans are working in the mess hall. Burgess is walking by, and behind the tent they had set up these two young Okinawans are doing karate.
Oh,
Like they're like lightly sparring.
oh,
Burgess was like, so he goes over to them and he's trying to ask them, what, what are you doing? What are you doing? And they go, Tay, Tay.
mm,
Right? So Burgess is like, he's still not sure, right? So he's telling me this story, and I'm like, this is like crazy because we're talking now
45, 46 time frame.
early. This is
Yeah.
before anybody has heard of karate, right? As far as
Yeah.
in the States, right? And he goes, he said, so they told him what it was, kind of, and he said, oh, can you teach me? Burgess was always a sports guy, boxer, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, judo, always into different things. And they got their eyes got big, he said, and they says, oh no, no, we have to ask. We have to, get permission. So he says, oh, could you ask? So they went and asked, and then they went and got Burgess. This is days later, and they said, you can you come with us? And so he went with them, and they brought him to meet this old Okinawan guy who had a white beard, right? And he was the sensei. And Burgess brought an interpreter, and the sensei asked Burgess, why do you want to study Tay? And Burgess looked at him and says, well, I really like sports. Like I like boxing and wrestling, and I do all kinds of sports. And he goes, I never saw a sport like this. I never saw like with the kicking and everything. And it just looks like it's really good. Like, it looks like it's something I'd really enjoy. And the sensei sat there and went like this and said, okay, show him. Right. And from that point on, the two guys started teaching him. Right. So he learned like the Pinan kata and some basic things. So I said to Burgess, I said, what was the name of the sensei? He says, Mike, I never asked.
Ah,
I literally was crushed
oh
because I
man.
said, oh my God, if only he knew the name, right?
Yeah.
That'd be like, but that's a 100% true story. Because if I showed you the photos that he took of what Okinawa looked like right after the Battle of Okinawa,
Oh, it was destroyed.
oh my God. It's unbelievable. And so that to me is a fantastic story. Because again, it just shows you, right? And so here even in 45, some people are still calling it Tay. They're not
Mhm.
calling it karate, right? And he was probably, if you think about it, this guy Jim Burgess was probably one of the first Americans to do karate in Okinawa,
Yeah,
if
probably.
not the first, right?
Yeah, very,
And
very much.
he just, he told me this story in passing because obviously he knew I did Isshin-Ryu, right? And he told me the story so matter of fact, like it was such not a big deal. And meanwhile, to me, it was like, holy crap, that's a big deal, right? Like, I said to him, you realize you're probably one of the first, if not the first American to do some actual karate
Yeah,
training on Okinawa, you
yeah.
know?
Very soon after that, in the early 50s, you had Anthony Morakian and some of these other guys like
Right,
that. But yeah, that predates them. So
right. So it's, too bad, like I said, too bad we don't know who the
the
sensei,
first American,
yeah,
yeah, and
yeah, the
who that
sensei.
sensei was, yeah.
And then I also understand that, like, I think Mitchum, that he also trained with Eiko, was it Eiko Kanishi or Kinjo Kinsaku a bunch? He
So
wasn't
he
always
trained
training
with
with
Chinsaku,
Tatsuo.
with Kenjo Chinsaku, is my understanding. Now, I don't know the totality of that training.
Right.
I don't know the frequency of that training. I still would give him credit as being a student of Master Shimabuku's during
Oh,
that same time frame
oh
as
yeah,
well.
100%. 100%.
There's no reason you couldn't cross train and be with the both instructors during the occasions he was there. So Sensei Mitchum was in Okinawa the first time from February of 1958, but he didn't start training with Tatsuo until like early March of '58, and then he left in I want to say May of 1959, and then he was gone for about 5 or 6 months, and he came back in October of '59 for a second tour, and then he left in like late November of 1960. I mean, I have their service records, and I can pull up the dates, but it'd take a little bit of time to find it, so I'm just going by memory here. And then he was gone again for about 5 or 6 months. He didn't come back until the beginning of May of '61 for a third tour, and then he left from that one mid-November of 1964, and he left on the same plane on that in 1964 as Vincula and Paul Heffernan. They
Okay.
all went to the States together. So the AOKA, I've got a letter from Steve Armstrong to Jake Eckenrode that was written in September of 1960, where he talks about, because Mr. Eckenrode had already left Okinawa in like May, and he's out at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina at this point. And then he got out of the service in like 1961, I think. But anyway, Armstrong was still on Okinawa, so he wrote to Jake Eckenrode and was telling him, we've got the American Okinawan Karate Association set up, and you're on the board of directors as far as the association is over here, and anyway, so it didn't really get going well until early 61 though, because the three main folks that was in it at the time, you had Mitchum, who was designated as the president, and Armstrong was the vice president, and Frank Van Linton was the secretary originally. Well, all three of those folks left within like 2 months or 3 months of the association being created.
Okay.
Plus, I have Frank Van Linton's book where he said, yeah, it was in August of 60, so he tells a little bit about it. But yeah, they were all gone. And the only one that actually came back, so Armstrong got out of the military like a week after he got back to the States in October of 60. And he moved up to Tacoma, Washington and started teaching up there practically immediately. And then Frank Van Linton, he had originally studied Goju-Ryu before he started in Isshin-Ryu, but the story he told was that he and this guy that he was studying with up at Camp Hansen, they competed in the tournament, and when Seikichi Toguchi got wind of it, that was the guy he was training with's teacher, Tom Mahoney, I think was his name. But anyway, when Toguchi got wind of it, he kicked him out of the school because that was a big no-no for them back then. And so anyway, Mr. Van Linton went and trained with Tatsuo because the Marine Corps was paying for it. So it was free for him.
Right.
And he trained for, 10, 11 months or whatever. And then he went back to the States. But when he went back to the States, he switched back over to Goju-Ryu, and he was more in love with Goju-Ryu. And that's fine,
Yeah.
but he was a big proponent of Goju-Ryu and so on. But anyway, so he was no longer really involved in our system anymore, even if he was on friendly terms with many of the folks that were. And then Mitchum, he got back. He was a career Marine like Van Linton was, but he stayed with Isshin-Ryu, Mitchum Sensei, of course. And then he got back in May of 61, and he was reappointed as the president of the AOKA. And everybody's seen that letter where they're appointing him as the president. Well, that's
Right.
the second time that he's been appointed as the president, really.
Okay.
So there was a process there where they had the official stationery was not made up until a certain point, and so you can see some of the letters that Ralph Bove had written, and they're on different stationery or not really on stationery at all. And then they created the AOKA in August of 60, and they got some paper rank certificates made up like right thereafter, but there were no membership certificates in the association until the following year, to like August of 61. That's when they're first issued.
So that's kind of funny if you think about it.
Yeah. So
they get the rank certificates made up first.
Well, yeah, it's
right, Go ahead.
And there was supposed to have been, the oral history is that there was an error at the print shop where it was supposed to be Okinawan American Karate Association, and the printmaker, flipped them around, and it was American Okinawan Karate Association, and they didn't change it.
Right.
I know some people have said, "Oh, they didn't have the money." I'm thinking, what do you mean they didn't have the money? Master Shimabuku was making $250 a month. Of course, he had the money. They could have thrown that stationery away or the paper, the certificates away, redo it. It wasn't really that costly, and maybe the Americans could have paid for it, and it would have been fine, but they didn't.
Bartasevitz has indicated to me when I spoke to him about some stuff. He indicated to me that there was some shenanigans going on with certificates in the early days.
Listen, Bill Braun told me. He said, and again, I don't mean to say these things to put anybody down at all, but he said that people were fighting tooth and nail to get like the lowest certificate numbers. Like that really meant anything. And it's like, isn't it enough that you guys were there and that you were the ones that trained with the master? And so I have found that there were 2 number 1 certificates and there were 2 number 2 certificates.
Okay.
So it's interesting. And Sensei Harold Long, he actually got a certificate for 7th Dan in October of 1960, and he'd been gone from Okinawa for 2 years. So I don't know how that went down. I'm not insinuating that it wasn't above board or anything. I just was like, well, that's interesting. And then Mr. Tom Lewis got his Godan certificate then, and Armstrong got his 7th Dan, and Mitchum got his 7th Dan when he left in 60. So it's all very interesting. And then finally the following year in 61, when they got the membership certificates, I think it kind of became a requirement that you had to be a member of the association to subsequently get an actual rank promotion from then
Right.
on. And then the record keeping got a little bit better, but I still know of certain occasions where people were having duplicate membership numbers, you know.
Right. Yeah. So where's Harry Smith fit in all this?
So Harry Smith got to Okinawa in early August of 1957, and he left Okinawa on the same ship that Art Smiley did in early June of 58. So he was physically on Okinawa about 9 months and a week out of about 10 months and 5 days that he was stationed in the Far East, because for about 3 weeks in February, March timeframe of 1958, he was in the Philippines.
Okay.
Harold Lawson was there, was in the Philippines. Dick Keith was there, was in the Philippines. It was a big exercise that they were doing in the Philippines. And a lot of these guys, actually, Dick Keith spent less time in Okinawa than Harold Long did, because Mr. Keith went to the Philippines one more time than Long did.
Okay.
You know, so but Long and Keith were there together, 57, 58. So, but that's the thing. I went to get these service records on all these folks because I wanted to genuinely know about who was there, when, and how long. And it wasn't to prove anybody wrong, and it wasn't to tarnish anybody's legacy or any of that. Some people have acted like that was my motivation. I said, no, not at all. It's like I genuinely cared about it, and that's why I wanted to know. So I straightened out the timeline of who was on Okinawa when and for how long. It's no animosity.
Well, I just, in the interview with Andreas Quast, I said, I want my history warts and all.
Yeah, it's we're not.
I mean, I'm just, and again, don't get me wrong. Like there's things that can't be proven, so that I take with a grain of salt, right? But again, if when guys were there, I think that's kind of important,
Yeah.
especially when guys make claims,
Yeah.
um, I Harry Smith came to one of my seminars
I remember reading your comment.
a
Somebody
few
said,
years ago, and Walter Van Gilson came too. And I think Walter Van Gilson was there for quite a while too, right? Because I know he went back. He went back after he got out of the Marine
right. He told me that the first, and I wish to goodness I'd been able to talk to him more in depth, but I remember some of the things that he told me. And he told me that the first time he was stationed in Okinawa, he was actually at Marine Corps Air Station for Tenma, and he was training in Uechi-Ryu with Uechi Kane at first. And then he went to Vietnam, and then he came back to Okinawa when he was stationed at Camp Hansen, and that's when he was training with Tatsuo. He'd come down there and train at Gena, and I think by that time they had already moved the actual Hamada Dojo had gone away, and they moved the class directly onto the base, because during the Vietnam era, when it was in full swing, they didn't really have a whole lot of Marines that were on Okinawa anymore. And that's around the time that the contracts became less exclusive, and several of the local instructors had contracts to teach on the bases near where they lived and so on. But yeah, he said he trained with Tatsuo then, and I think he always had this real respect for Master Uezu, and I finally realized why. It's because Uezu had been his main instructor seemingly under Tatsuo's direction, of course. At that point in time in the late '60s, and then of course Mr. Van Gilson, I forget what month it was. It was like maybe August, September timeframe of I want to say 1968. He got out of the Marine Corps, and then by like November of that same year, he came back. And I think he was there for like 2 or 3 months or whatever, and then he went back for a little bit to the States, and then he went back to Okinawa one more time, and then I can't remember if it was that visit or if maybe there was one more in between when he went back and stayed there for like 12 months or 13 months as a civilian. And he said that around the time that he got there, Robert Bremer had gotten there, coincidentally, and they were, I don't know if they were about the same age or what, but they became friends. And he said they pooled their money and they stretched it and stretched it and stretched it as much as they could. And they weren't eating properly there towards the end, because they were.
Yeah, no, I know things were tough near the end. I know.
Yeah, and he said he got real sick, and he said he thought Tatsuo thought he was going to die, and he said he came and prayed over him, and then but he did recover, of course, and he went on. And actually, I talked to another gentleman you may know, David Evseth, and he said that he talked to Bob Bremer's personal physician actually, and he said that Mr. Bremer had contracted some kind of, I hate to say diseases, but some kind of illnesses or whatever when he was in Okinawa that plagued him for the remainder of his life or whatever. So yeah, there was some pretty bad stuff going on back then, I guess, and they weren't inoculated for it or whatever.
Well, I'll tell you. So The first time I saw Walter Van Gilson was in 1981 at the IWK Championships in New Jersey. And I remember watching him do kata, and someone said, "Oh, that's Walter Van Gilson. He studied with Tatsuo on Okinawa." But I
Mm.
was a brown belt, like, so it's not like I'm going up to the guy and talking to him.
Yeah, yeah.
But luckily, I was standing there and saw him, and someone said that who he was. So fast forward probably 2 years, I'm Shodan now, and Angi Weizu's out at Nick Adler's, and there's a tournament and a seminar. And I go
Mhm.
out and I'm sitting in the stands. The seminar is over, the tournament's going on, and I'm sitting and I look over and I see Walter Van Gilson sitting in the stands by himself. And I
Mhm.
turn to my student and I go, I think that's Sensei Van Gilson. And he goes, who's that? I go, he studied with Tatsuo. I said, I'm going to go over and talk to him. And my student goes, yeah. I'm going, yeah. If anything, he'll tell me to get lost. If he tells me to get lost,
Yeah.
I'll come back and sit with you. Right. So I walk over. I said, Sensei Van Gilson? So he looks at me, he goes, yeah. I said, hi, I'm Mike Calandra. I said, I saw you in 1981 in the, World Championships. And, I saw you sitting here and I know you studied with Tatsuo. I was just wondering if I'd come over and talk to you a little bit. And he said, sure, have a seat. And, we talked and stuff. And I said to him, so Kichiro came up, Angi came up, and I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, well, some of the Americans knock Kichiro and they knock Angi Weizu and stuff, right? And they say certain things. He goes, but I'm telling you, I watched Kichiro and Angi Weizu bounce many a so-called tough guy Marine around in that dojo.
Oh, I don't doubt that at all.
He says those guys were no joke, so that's where I first sat down and talked with him. And then when I left my first teacher, and my first teacher was contacting all the Dons and Isshin-Ryu saying, don't have anything to do with this guy. Van Gilson was the first guy to come up to me and said, hey, just letting you know, he's coming up to every one of us telling us what a bad guy you are and you're terrible. And he goes, I know you. He says, you're fine with me. Anything I can do for you, just let me know. And Nick Adler was another guy that did the same thing.
I
And so,
met him a couple of
so,
times actually.
so throughout the years, I got to spend some time with Walter Van Gilson, not as much as I'd like.
Yeah.
Um, Out at Winkler's, he came. I used to do a camp in New Jersey, a weekend camp. I would invite him. Why would I invite him? Well, it's Jersey. Hey, Sensei, if you want to come, feel free
Well,
to
why
come
would you
by.
not? I mean, if it's your camp and he's a first generation guy, it's like, why would you not want him there?
Well, right. But I invite him thinking he's not going to come, right? And then he shows up. So, he taught some stuff and I taught some stuff. And he was very complimentary in some of the stuff I was teaching and some of the things I was explaining. He was like, oh, Mike, I'm going to have to think about some of that because some of the stuff. And then he came to the one that Harry Smith showed up at. That one was in Pennsylvania. And I didn't know he was coming again. And he brought students with him. I was with my guys, and first Van Gilson walks in, and one of my students goes, Sensei, is that Walter Van Gilson? I'm like, yeah. They go, what's he doing here? I said, I have no idea. Right. Because I'm thinking, why is he coming to my seminar? Right. So, obviously I went over to him and we know each other. So, hugs, right? He's introducing me to some of his students. I said, Sensei, don't take this the wrong way, but why are you here? He goes, well, you're teaching a seminar, right? I said, well, yeah, but you're Walter Van Gilson. That's literally what I said to him. I'm not bullshitting you. I go, but you're Walter Van Gilson, right?
He had
He goes, he
no
goes, no.
air.
He goes, no, Mike. There's a lot of things you're doing that I'm very interested in. So I said, all right. And then a few minutes later, Harry Smith walked in. And Harry Smith at the time couldn't do anything. So he just sat and watched. And during the seminar, he was very complimentary. It was a week later that he decided to become uncomplimentary.
Yeah, yeah. I saw that exchange there and I was like, oh man.
Yeah. And and again, people that live in glass houses,
Yeah,
again, again. So I know things about Harry Smith that probably a lot of
yeah,
people don't know about.
I probably know a lot of it. Well, maybe not the extent that you probably know, but I know at least a portion of what you
Yeah,
know.
let's just say I have copies of certain records, let's just say, right?
Mhm.
Okay. And they have nothing to do with martial arts, right?
Yeah,
But anyway, Van Gilson, said to me at the seminar, because I was talking about a lot of Chinese concepts that I felt were originally in karate, but as karate became more modernized and went in the direction more of a sport, that stuff was lost.
right.
And Van Gilson actually said to me, he says, Mike, you're doing what we should have done. he says we should have gone back to China and we should have done that research. He said, but you're doing it, and I think it's great. So it made me feel good that, but he also told me some things which I'm going to ask you if you've ever heard. Like he told me that the Okinawans were being trained differently from the Americans.
Well, I do know that at least some teachers did. Now, I have heard that Kisei Fusei, for instance, he would teach in his dojo in town to the Okinawans differently than he'd teach the Americans on the base.
Right.
And I have heard that he tried mighty hard to keep them from intermingling so they wouldn't know that.
Right.
And but of course it got out that they were being taught differently. So I don't know who, which all teachers were doing that, but probably he wasn't the only
Well,
one.
he said he witnessed classes at Tatsuo's dojo where there were only Okinawans at. And some like he saw some of them doing Seiyuchin on the 45, and he saw some other things. And so he said, he says, so, one of the things he said to me was, you just got to understand that, some things that people might be claiming aren't 100% true, right? Um, like one of the things I wanted to ask you was like, I think it was you recently mentioned that you think Tatsuo learned Nahanshi from Keon.
So that's what, again, Mr. Vincula did a lot of this research, and that's what he said that Tatsuo said was that he had gotten Naihanchi from Kyan. I've also seen an article while I was in Okinawa that was on in the Okinawa Times, and it also said that Kyan taught Naihanchi. So I suspect, just like many of the teachers did, they modified their curriculum as they went along after a period of time, and perhaps Naihanchi was taught earlier on, and then he dropped it. Like Miyagi was supposed to have been teaching Naihanchi as well, but after the 1930s, like 1937, he didn't teach it because he
Well,
didn't like it.
there's also some evidence that some of the Shorin guys were doing Sanshin.
Yeah,
Well,
so there was a lot of cross pollination
yeah.
earlier on, and then after a time, that kind of some of it went away at least. And Tatsuo was not a strict disciplinarian seemingly, and he knew that there were multiple ways that could be equally viable and so on, and so he encouraged it and cross training and so forth. But yeah, people if they were doing Seiyunchin in a different way than what we're doing, it's who knows where he got it from or
And the
whatever.
thing I find interesting with the Isshin-Ryu Nahanchi is the fact that we step to the left.
Well, that's the old Tomarite version, though. So it's my
Right.
understanding that Itosu is the one that changed that to go to the right.
Right. And the
Mhm.
Motobu-Ru, they practice it, they
Right.
practice it both ways. So
There
they
you go.
practice going to the left and going to the right.
Mhm.
So, again, just
He taught it according to if you read the stuff, Kyan taught it with the pigeon toe position, right?
right,
And his heels kicked out, his toes turned in. But Motobuchoki was not a fan of that, and he always was in the Kiwadachi, there.
right, right,
He did not like the way that Itosu was doing that, even though Itosu was supposed to have been his teacher too, briefly.
right.
And I think he called it something like a turtleback or something, the way of doing that stance or what. But anyway, Motobu was not a fan of that. So that's why I say that I'm not going to say that Tatsuo never learned anything about Naihanchi from Motobu, but I think that he had already learned it from Kyan and was going to keep it that way for the most part. But I think that the hand positions for some of the, that type of stuff, where
Uh-huh.
the Shurite people are doing it this way, and some other folks are doing it this way, and Isshin-Ryu is in the middle.
Right,
So I think it's a blending of the way that Kyan did it versus and the way that Motobu did it.
right.
So there's some blending.
Well, also, I think if he trained with Motobu and when he trained with Motobu, I would think, everybody says Nahanchi was Motobu's kata, right?
Oh yeah,
So you figure there has to have been some influence there, right?
right. Of course, I
You
think
know,
there was, but I think that Motobu knew other kata, but he just preferred the Naihanchi, and so he
right.
kind of got the reputation of that's the only one he knew, but that's not really so.
Yeah, and I find it interesting, and I talk about this sometimes with my senior guys. Um, Tatsuo seems to have been a very interesting individual.
Yeah, and I sure wish I could have met him.
Right. Me too. And the idea that everybody's doing the Pinan kata and Tatsuo says,
Well,
nope.
he never learned them because none of his teachers taught them.
Right. But again, too, I think again, they're school children kata.
Right, that's what they were devised for.
Right. When I first went to Okinawa and I was doing stuff and Kichiro at the time there were several black belts there, adult black belts, and a little bit older than me. And, they were asking Kichiro about me. And, Kichiro was telling them in Japanese, he says, "Oh, Michael's like my father, self-defense only. So Michael's karate is only self-defense. He does not do sport, right?" And, I would have loved to meet him too, right? And, so in your research, how was Tatsuo earning a living besides teaching karate? Like, I know he was in the Philippines. So in the Philippines, was he farming? What was he doing in the Philippines?
So I believe that Avincula said that he was like on a work troupe, and maybe doing some kind of comedy too on the side a little bit, maybe just to entertain people. I don't know that that was a paying job, and I don't know how long he did that, or even if he really did that. That was just oral history, and unfortunately,
Right,
some of this is all. That's all we got is the oral history.
right,
But a lot of the Okinawans left Okinawa because of it being the poorest prefecture of Japan, and he still is, and had the lowest test scores and stuff like that. Even though it's supposed to be, prefecture of Japan, it's just not up to the same standards in many ways. But I mean, I loved it there, of course. But so a lot of the Okinawans left and went to Argentina and Tinian and Saipan and Philippines and mainland Japan and all these other places, probably even the Guam too, and the Formosa or Taiwan, So I guess he was just doing whatever work he could do, odd jobs and stuff like that. So I really don't know other than that. And then supposedly when he went to Osaka, he was like a security guard, and
right.
he was
I heard
well
that. I heard
paid.
that also.
Yeah, he was well paid there. But then when they vacated Okinawa to go or evacuated to go to Kyushu, he was a farmer again, and he already been from a farming family supposedly, and so that's what he did when he got there. And Takaharu Town, that's where it's supposed to have been. Nishimuro Kata district, that's still like farmland pretty much.
Right.
And it has evolved some, and different villages that perhaps once existed have been consolidated with others and stuff. So
But look, even when I first went to Okinawa in '91, like
yeah.
outside of the IWK headquarters, right across the street was a farm.
Oh, I don't doubt that at all.
Now it's not there.
Oh
Now it's
no.
gone. But there was still you'd walk around and there was still a lot of even small family farms. That
Directly across the street from my house, where I was fortunate to live the entire time, there was
yeah,
a farmer, literally a farmer. He'd be out there many, many days of the
yeah,
week, if not every day, and he would bring us crops and stuff. And he was just so nice, and his wife
yeah.
was so nice, and the wife would bake us a pie, and it was wonderful.
Yeah, I just find it interesting, again, it would have been great to, and part of this is part of the reason we don't have as much information is because of the guys who were studying with them, which were Marines, right? I mean, they're used to following orders. They're all young guys. They're
Yeah.
not going to be asking these kinds of questions.
Well, that's right. And most of them didn't know how to ask it, even if they wanted to,
Right,
because of the language barrier and because of the cultural differences. Most of them didn't give a hoot about it anyway,
right,
sadly. And some of them really got into it, and learning Japanese and stuff like
right.
Angus Reynolds. He I've got his record too, and it's got all kinds of college courses of learning Japanese and this and that. So he was really into the Japanese and Eastern cultures like that. So that's cool. But very few of them actually seem to have done that. But there was not enough time to be experts at everything.
Right, right.
It just wasn't.
Yeah. But again, like people, like even me, and I'm one to say it, well, they only train for X amount of time, and look at your own students in your own dojo that are only training that amount of time, and they came back these high dans. Okay, that's one aspect. But the other aspect is they came back and they spread it.
Mhm.
And without them, me and you aren't sitting
That's
here.
exactly right. Exactly. I've always said you can't fault these folks
No.
for teaching what they knew.
Right.
Truthfully, again, I know this does sound kind of disrespectful, but probably most of them didn't have any real business teaching. But
Right.
I
Right.
say if they didn't, we wouldn't be here. So we
Right.
owe them a debt of gratitude for that.
Well, even I'm sure you feel the same way. I mean, I know, I just finished 45 years,
Mhm. But
right?
thank
Which
God
my
we
my
did
my
teach.
my standard joke is it just means I'm old, right? But anyway, the thing is I remember when I started teaching,
Mhm.
okay? And I remember how I was as an early teacher compared to now. And I cringe. I literally cringe thinking about those early days. Well, because I mean, we all think we're doing a good job when we first start teaching.
Of course, of course.
And and again, so if you work at the craft of teaching, which I think teaching martial arts and doing martial arts are two completely different skill sets, right?
Mm.
Hopefully if you improve in that area, you see the growth as a teacher,
Yeah,
um so like again, I wish I would have been alive earlier so I could have interviewed and spoken to Tatsuo and asked him questions. And that's why I want to sit down hopefully with Kichiro Shimabuku in the coming year and ask him some questions and see what he has to say. I was lucky enough, I've been into his house a bunch of times, and the last time I was at his house, believe it or not, we were sitting eating pizza, right? And we walked in. The first couple of times I was there, I guess I wasn't as comfortable. So I kind of went and just kind of sat down, and you know what I'm saying? I didn't like
oh
kind of,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
but
I've been.
by this point, the relationship is really solid. I mean, I think the world of the guy. He's treated me like gold. So I was looking around the house, but not like just the area where I was in, the
Yeah,
living.
not scooping.
And I looked up and I saw these two photos,
His
portraits, and I
grandparents.
said to him, those your grandparents?" And he says, "Yeah." And I said, "Sensei, could I take photos of that?" He said, "Of course." And so I posted the one. I put a mark on it, that says, right. But I found it interesting. I stood there for a while, especially Tatsuo's grandfather. I really stood there and was just looking at the face. You could see he had the eye kind of thing also. Like
Hmm.
Tatsuo had,
Yeah.
and it's just interesting. So hopefully,
Oh,
go ahead.
and you might also find interesting if you didn't hear this about me having said this before, but Uezu Sensei told me back in like 2010, he said that basically the reason why there was such an age difference between Tatsuo, who was the oldest, and Eizo, who was the youngest, well, almost like 17 years difference, is because Tatsuo's father had two different wives. I guess the first one had died, and he remarried and had a bunch more kids. So they're
Well,
actually.
it's interesting. We have a tendency to look at things through the modern lens. But like I'm living in Arizona now.
Mhm.
And if you were in Arizona in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and you were a woman who moved out here with your husband and your husband died, you could not survive out here unless you married again.
Right.
And it is probably, if you think about it, it's probably the same thing with Tatsuo's father. If his wife died, he's left with kids. I don't know what his business was, but if he's a farmer, how's he raising kids,
That's
working the farm? You have to you have to find another wife. I mean, that's just the way it is, you
right.
know. So, but
But these are the kinds of things maybe you can ask Kichiro
yeah,
Sensei about.
yeah. I'll see if
If,
and
I
again,
can't imagine that Oazu said that if it wasn't so. You
yeah, and
know.
again, like to me, that's not a big deal.
Yeah, it's not to me. It's not a big deal, but it was
It's
an
totally
interesting
to me, it's totally
historical.
normal. It's
Yeah,
it's
and
normal.
I didn't know that until he told me that. So and he tried to give me some of the names of the other 8 kids, but he couldn't remember some of them. I got the names of 2 or 3 of them. But I was taxing his memory apparently because he
Right.
hadn't thought about that in a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there came a point when Tatsuo and Azo weren't really there was I don't think there was any communication between the two.
So, did you hear the story behind that?
Well, you tell me the story you heard and
So, Sensei Johnson told me that one day he and Bill Blonde, and that he thinks it was Evenka that was in there too, but they were, friendly with one another. And he and Bill used to train together all the time. So, it had to have been Blonde if he said it was. But anyway, the three of them were there. And he said that one day Tatsuo just started ranting about something, just going off, on and on. And either Advincula's wife or girlfriend at the time, or Blonde's wife or girlfriend at the time, they're Okinawan. They said, "What's he talking about? What's going on here?" And so they listened, and then they said, "Oh, he's yelling about his brother." So what they found it out was is that Azo, again, not even to be disrespectful to the memory of Mr. Azo Shimabuku, but he was able to apparently get Tatsuo's contract away from him for a period of time, and because of that, they were estranged.
Okay.
And my sensei said that when he came back to Okinawa, when he was on an around the world trip in the summer of 1970 for about 3 weeks, he stopped into Okinawa to see Master Shimabuku. And that was the first time he'd ever met Kichiro. And that was the first time he'd seen the dojo with the roof put on it, because they put it on like the year after he left Okinawa.
Okay.
And so anyway, they had this party in the dojo for Master Kichiro's son, who had just been born, was a newborn, and
Okay.
they had the party in there, and Kichiro's wife is holding the baby in there. And he said that Shinsho told him, go down to this store around the corner here and buy this envelope that's got these red Chinese characters on it and put
Right.
$2 in there and give it to Kichiro's wife.
Right.
And they did, and he said they must have fed him like $6 worth of food. It was like a big old huge spread. But at
Right.
any rate, so he said at that party, Eizo Shimabuku was there, and he said that he, would kind of observe, and he'd see that when Eizo was looking across the room over at Tatsuo, he'd follow Eizo's gaze and see that he was looking at Tatsuo. And when Tatsuo would notice that Eizo was looking at him, he would look away. And then he said that he would follow Tatsuo's gaze, and he would look across the room at Eizo. And when Eizo would notice that Tatsuo was looking at him, he would look away. So they never did reconcile in their lifetimes. And I can imagine that's a pretty bad blowout there.
Yeah. I mean, I got the impression from Kichiro Shimabuku that there was yeah, bad blood there.
Yeah.
So
And I'm friends with John and Pam Lodi. I don't know if
okay.
you know them, but Mr. Lodi was in Okinawa in like 1978, 79 and trained with Eizo. He was in the
Okay.
Navy. Well, he was a hospital corpsman and trained out there with Eizo, pretty much exclusively. And I think he was a Hachidan with Eizo, I think he said. But at any rate, he said that Eizo would come to the States and stay with him at least on one occasion down in Florida, and they'd be driving around in the car or somewhere, and Eizo would be off and remembering things and just get irate, and he said he had to snap him out. He said, "Sensei, Sensei," it's like John-san, it's not Tatsuo,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
he was like just mad as all get out. It's
Well,
whatever.
I mean, look, we all have family, right?
Yeah,
And sometimes you got a family member you don't get along with.
yeah,
I mean, it's just again, it's human nature. It has nothing to do with karate. It's human nature, right?
yeah. But that's I understand it's probably pretty cutthroat back in those days. Back in the early '60s, of just trying to make ends meet. So,
Well,
but
when you look at how much they suffered during and after the war,
oh, sure, sure,
and they're worried about putting food on the table. I mean, again, I try to explain to people, again, we look at things through the modern lens, and sometimes you got to take a step back.
right,
We cannot, guys like me and you cannot even comprehend what they were dealing with.
right. And you can't judge the past by today's
No,
senses and
no,
stuff.
you
So,
know, you know. It's funny. Because I had heard also that they were mad because Azo had gone to the mainland to get Judon.
well, that might be part of it as well.
Right,
I heard that only Azo and like one other fellow is the one that showed up when Toyama Kanken like called him up there.
right.
Because they felt like, well, why should we be dictated to by a Japanese association?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there when Harold Mitchum got promoted to ninth dan by the All Japan Budo Federation.
Oh, nice.
Um, I was there because I was still with Fink at the time. And I remember I was in Fink's living room, and Masafumi Suzuki, who was the president of the All Japan Budo Federation, he was the one that was recognizing Mitchum as the ninth dan. And it was interesting, the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. Harold Long was also a member of that association, and he was the Isshin-Ryu representative for that association.
I
And
believe he got a Nazi down from them too.
and Fink was trying to get Mitchum to be the representative. And
Mm.
Suzuki was adamant, and even Mitchum was like, well, I was there. Mitchum was there before Long, right, on Okinawa.
No, Long was there first.
Okay, so
Long,
whatever.
Long got there
But
in
anyway,
like
they were
July.
lobbying for Mitchum to be named the guy, and Fink was the one pushing it hard. And it was funny because I was probably I was knee down at the time. I was knee down, and Suzuki at one point got up from the table. I was sitting on the couch playing with one of Fink's kids, and Suzuki came over and sat next to me, and he patted me on my arm and said, "Michael, you be Sinbon, you be referee, right?" Because they was getting a little heated with the three of them,
Yeah,
right? And I just kind of laughed because again, I'm what am I going to say? These are all senior guys arguing over this stuff, right? But Yeah, so I was there in the room when that discussion was going on. I was there when he prevented Mitchum with his Kudan certificate. Um, and it was just, back then I don't really didn't think anything of it, but it's pretty cool that I was there in the room when that happened and all that was going on. And I trained with Mitchum a few times. Great guy, another super nice guy, great guy.
I
Um,
got to meet him one time.
yeah, very very powerful karate. I've been lucky. I've trained with a bunch of them. I've trained with Harry Ackland.
Mm,
Harry Ackland a couple of times, obviously Van Gilson, Winkler a ton of times, Angi Uezu a ton of times, even Tokamura although Tokamura is an interesting case too. You talk about it. I never heard of Tokamura until the early 1990s,
mm,
and then he came when I the first time at Winkler brought him to California, he's wearing a Goju patch
yeah.
because he's with Eiichi Miyazato and studying Goju.
Uh,
But he still practiced Tokomini. He practiced
yeah.
Hamahiga still. Um,
Yeah.
he still kind of knew the Isshin-Ryu Kata. But it was interesting. Like again, he was someone that kind of came out from nowhere a little bit, and then once the Isshin-Ryu guys kind of latched on to him again, and then he started kind of doing things, and then he of course started his own style of Kobudo, which a lot of the Isshin-Ryu guys do. Um,
Yeah.
but
I actually went to Okamoto one time and had him look over my kata, and he approved, thankfully, or maybe he was just trying to make me feel good. I don't know,
right,
but he
right,
seemingly approved. He first thing he said after I showed him Kusan Ku, he said, "Good." So
right,
okay,
right.
there we go.
Yeah. And again, I think I think everybody's contributed something.
Of course, yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
I think they
And
all deserve to be respected in their own rights for their contributions to
yeah.
Isshin-Ryu. So I hope that anybody listening does
I do
and down.
think there needs to be less um attached to the personality and more trying to work on the actual physical art. In other words, well, if I'm with Advincula, everything Advincula says is 100% correct. If I'm with this guy, everything he says is 100% correct. And even like I said, Kichiro Sensei said to me, he says, Michael, if I do things you don't like, don't do it.
There we go. Some
And
people may think that I do everything, Ed Johnson's way. I do things like 95, 96% Ed Johnson's way, but there are
right,
some things that he and I have talked about that I do differently from him, but it's things that I got from another first generation student or that I can see on the videos that Tatsuo himself did, and I like those ways,
right.
and he's fine with that. You
Well, I
know?
show I showed Van. I was teaching something with Seiyuchin involved in the stance one time, and Van Gilson was there, and I demonstrated physically why the way I was showing it was superior to the way that most people were doing it, and it involved someone trying to push me, and when I was in the proper alignment, you couldn't move me. So there was a guy there that was over 400 pounds,
Ooh.
very large individual, and he said to me, "Can I try it? Can I try pushing you?" And I said, "Sure." And he tried pushing me, and he couldn't move me. And when he stepped back, he goes, "That's just not right." Like he couldn't understand how he couldn't push me. So it was a different way of doing it from the way Van Gilson had been taught to do it.
Mm.
And after I showed it, Van Gilson turned to me and looked at me and goes, "I'm going to have to think long and hard about that." Like, in other
No,
words, he was open-minded enough that he
absolutely. He was a
saw
great person.
there was something there. And I told him, I said, look, this isn't a Mike Calandra invention. This is from one of my Chinese masters that taught me how to utilize this stance. And I firmly believe that it was utilized like that originally. But again,
Oh,
when it becomes about doing a kata for judges and not about doing it to be able to do it at a high level to engage in life and death combat,
yeah.
it gets changed a little bit.
That's
So
why I don't change my kata for tournament performance. I do it the same way for
yeah,
tournaments. Do it and teach it.
yeah, yeah. And so yeah, so listen, I appreciate you coming on.
Well, I'd love to be here. Thank you so
And
much.
and so what's your plan for the future? Are you thinking about a book or what are you thinking about?
So I have been compiling historical information essentially since I began. So this is, almost 31 years. And, I'm hoping to put out something at some point in time, but I still feel like I'm getting more information on certain things and clarifying other things. And I don't want to try to jump the gun, so to speak, and put anything out when I might can be just around the corner from another potential important
Yeah,
discovery.
don't wait too long because you could always do an update to the book, right?
That's true
I mean, look,
too.
McCarthy's updated the Bubishi, and when I interviewed him, he told me he's planning on updating it again.
Yes.
Um, you know, don't wait too long. I think it would be good. I think, and I think the more, what would you concentrate on? The history mostly?
I think so. I do want to at some point at least have, like you said, maybe an addendum or a second volume or something that I do want to have like the how-to piece of it kind of thing. But
Right,
I do focus on the academic side of it with the
right,
history and whatnot, because I think that, uh, again, not to be disrespectful to the books that came before, but largely those are like how-to manuals and not so well researched on historical stuff.
right,
You know,
right,
and I want to help try to, clarify a lot of inaccuracies, and hopefully that
right,
will be well received,
right. Well, again, I think you'd be filling a void. Meaning, like you said, most of the books are how-to books, and a lot of them aren't very good. Some of them are okay, but
Right.
they're again for their time they were fine. Uh, but again, I think yeah, I think where the history is laid out, you know, um, I think it would be good.
Like I just
I,
recently been getting more historical research on Harry Acklin and Harry Smith and George Iburl and stuff, and I was like, oh, this is what happened. Oh, okay, that's certainly interesting,
well, Harry Ackland, I don't remember if he told me the story or if Kichiro Sensei told me the story, where when he went to Okinawa, he got off the plane and asked where Gushikawa was, and someone pointed in the direction, and he started walking.
I wouldn't doubt it. How many times do you know that did he say he went to Okinawa? Because I
I
only know
I I
one for
didn't I
sure.
don't know. I wish I knew the answer to that. I don't.
Yeah. I don't know when he went except for the one in 74 when he went with Harold Long and some of the other
Right.
folks,
The one
down.
thing the one thing I'll tell you this. So obviously I've managed to train with a lot of the first generation students and meet them, and the thing that always is quite interesting to me is the fact that they all look similar in how they do the kata.
Yes, which is good.
Right. So when a guy claims to be a first generation student and he doesn't have that same kind of look, it's
Yeah.
always to me a big red flag. And again,
Mhm.
you could get away with that stuff prior to the internet. You could claim to be, I studied with Tatsuo and I did this with Tatsuo. But now it's everybody can go to Okinawa, everybody can go to Japan, right? And people now know, and can clearly show that that wasn't the case,
Mhm.
So that is the one thing I've always found interesting. I see Chairman Harold Dusei-san, I see Harold Mitchum Dusei-san, I see Advincula Dusei-san. There's a certain quality, right? They all
Right.
have a very similar quality, and you add the Okinawans too, Kichido, Angi, all these guys. They all have that same kind of look, right? So it's good in terms of that consistency, And frankly, and we can end on this, and you can give me your thoughts, and then we'll finish up. But I think Tatsuo is a genius.
Oh yeah, and even Dan Smith from SabreCon, he told me one time, he said that he'd met Tatsuo, I guess, and he said he thought that Tatsuo was like some kind of a martial arts genius,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
So that's really
yeah.
nice of you to say.
I mean, so I punch several different ways in several different arts. So I have, you
Well,
know,
yeah, there's multiple ways that can be equally correct.
yeah, and that the Isshin-Ryu punch is idiot proof.
Mhm.
Meaning like there's not a lot of mechanics to it, right? Meaning in terms of the alignment, the elbow's down, it's a vertical fist, right? You don't have the twisting action, which a lot of times we know the elbow can go out, which causes
Yeah.
problems,
Oh,
right? But Tatsuo just seems to me to be a guy who just kind of figured it out, you know. And the mechanics, and this is the other thing I'll mention. Have you ever read the book Karate Shortens Your Lifespan?
no, I haven't.
That's a good book. That's a book you might want to look into getting. It's written by two doctors. If you can't find it, let me know. I'll shoot you a link to it. Um, and the body mechanics in Isshin-Ryu were good in that regard. Like the guy shows the problem with the deep stances. He shows certain problems with certain things. There's a whole chapter on Sanchin.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, so it's written by doctors, so it's pretty good. I did a review of it on the podcast, and I actually reached out to one of the authors, and I may look to get him on the podcast at some point to talk about that subject because it's interesting, right? But
Yeah.
and you look if you look, he has charts in the book that shows the average age of the general population when they're dying, and then he has the average age of the karate sensei. And a lot of times the general population in Okinawa is living a lot longer than the karate sensei. It's not always the case. But now in Tatsuo's case, you have a different, I think you have a different reason for him dying early, right?
Well, I heard that he got basically pneumonia or something and didn't get it treated in time, and it
Yeah,
was not, it just wasn't really anything to be done about it.
yeah. And
And of course, I heard he had a stroke as well.
right. But you look at the Isshin-Ryu Sensei, most of them live long lives. They're living pretty long. It's rare what one of them. I mean, you look at Bartasevitz and Winkler and Mitchum and Bill Dissel and all these guys. They lived long, healthy lives, right?
Even Mr. Armstrong, after he had that pituitary tumor rupture in the late 70s, he still lived a long time.
Right,
He had some diminished quality of life there in the last years, but he still lived quite a while.
right. And so I think the Isshin-Ryu body mechanics. This is why I consider Tatsuo a genius. I think is very conducive for a long, healthy life.
Well, everybody said his karate was natural,
Right,
so natural body positions and movements, and other systems are natural too. If you look at Oichiru and Gojiru, they
right,
still also doing upright stances.
right,
So,
right,
and some lineages of Shorin-ryu are doing that too.
right.
So,
So, all right, Andy, I appreciate you coming on.
well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity, and
And
hopefully,
listen, you write the book, or if there's anything else that comes up you want to talk about, let me know. Be happy to have you back on.
I do want to tell you something, but maybe it would maybe it'd be best if it wasn't recorded, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay, so you can tell me. We'll end it here, and you can tell me after and then you can tell me then. So, all right. So thanks again. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for watching again. Appreciate all my subscribers, members, and everyone who just decides to watch. I hope you liked the interview with Andy Sloane. There was some interesting historical things there that I found interesting. Hope you guys did too. Please, again, like, subscribe, consider becoming a member. Hope you liked this one. I know I enjoyed talking to Andy, and look forward to future interviews and other things with the podcast. All right. Appreciate you all. See you in the next one. Thanks. Take care.